Chapter 594. A 10,000-word chapter. The sun was already shining brightly in Snow Country. But the sky inside the palace of Snow Country suddenly darkened. After cutting off the call with Dongqing Wudi, President Jia Delan's body had been trembling slightly, not knowing whether it was because of anger or fear. Wars were often caused by the momentary madness of madmen. Behind this madness, President Jia Delan also realized what kind of price he had to pay. But he didn't expect that the price he had to pay was already unbearable at the beginning of the war. Li Tianlan defeated the 6 legions of Snow Country overnight. This was an absolute shame for Snow Country. But in the chaos, Jia Delan could accept all this. After all, Li Tianlan could defeat 6 legions, but he might not be able to defeat 8. Even if he could defeat 8, what about 10? No one could deny the dominance of real masters and elites on the battlefield, just like no one could deny the role of high-tech weapons on the battlefield. But at the end of the day, war was a fight between people. On a real cruel battlefield, artillery, bullets, and everything else would be destroyed, and masters would fall. Large-scale wars were never the stage for masters in the dark world to show off their skills. A large number of soldiers was everything and the only factor that could determine the outcome of a war. Jia Delan could also endure the stalemate and heavy losses of Mormons. Deity was very strong. The purgatory of heaven capital was very strong. The Samsara palace was very strong. The Beihai core was very strong. But this was something they had expected. In the final analysis, the reason why Jia Delan dared to launch a war was that the return of Tyrant made up for the lack of top-notch combat capability of Snow Country. After adding this strongest link, Jia Delan was completely confident that the millions of troops of Snow Country would wipe out everything. And although this war was launched by Snow Country, it was far more than the participants. Nearly half of the countries in Eastern Europe, large and small, had already stood in the camp of Snow Country. It would only take one night, or even less than one night, to wipe out the powerful families that were similar to tumors in their own territories. Then, they would form a coalition army and go straight to Mormons. So in this war, the army of Snow Country was endless, and it could be said to be in an invincible position. Jia Delan had no reason not to be confident. As for Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State was indeed the most powerful country in the world today, but the Divine Shield Corps of Snow Country, with nearly 200,000 troops, was also an elite force second only to the polar bear. In Jia Delan's estimation, even if these nearly 200,000 troops were no match for the Black Dragon army of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, it would not be difficult for them to form a solid defense line that the Black Dragon army could not break in a short time. Zhongzhou State would also mobilize troops. The Divine Shield Army would eventually collapse. But this will take time. What Zhongzhou State lacked the most now was time. In Jia Delan's expectation, when Zhongzhou State gathered its army and broke through the defense line of the Divine Shield Corps, the final battle of Mormons should have already ended. At that time, he would lead the countless coalition forces of various countries to the south. The absolute advantage in numbers could completely make up for the gap in combat effectiveness. At that time, he might even be able to defeat the army of Zhongzhou State and force Zhongzhou State to lower its head and compromise. For example, he could take back part of the land that originally belonged to Zhongzhou State and now belonged to Zhongzhou State but used to belong to Snow Country. For example, the territory that the Wang family of Beihai first developed, most of Beihai province, used to belong to Snow Country. Therefore, although President Jia Delan felt heartache for the current huge loss, he was still full of expectations for a better future. But he never expected that the biggest problem turned out to be the Divine Shield Corps, which should not have a problem the most. There were 120,000 people in the Black Dragon army. Only 40,000 people stayed behind. 80,000 people rushed to the border of Snow Country. In just a few hours, they directly broke the defense line of the Divine Shield Corps. The 2 marshals of the Divine Shield Corps knew Snow Country very well. The failure of this battle was so straightforward that it stunned people. But the military could not find any dereliction of duty by the 2 marshals who died in the battle. There was no problem with the defense line of the Divine Shield Corps. There was no problem with the armaments, logistics, and morale. There was no problem with anything. The only problem was that the Black Dragon army was too strong. There was no conspiracy. In the face of the defense line of nearly 200,000 people, the Black Dragon army directly rushed up. After the meal, the defense line was forcibly smashed. Such a gap lay in pure strength and fighting desire. This was not a strategic mistake, but it was an extremely fatal oversight. It was not until this moment that the world discovered that the Border Control Corps was the most elite super-large comprehensive army of Zhongzhou State. This was true. The Thunderbolt Battalion was also the most elite army of the Border Control Corps. This was also true. But the Border Control Corps with Dongqing Wudi and the Border Control Corps without Dongqing Wudi were two completely different concepts. The Border Control Corps. The Dongqing Corps. The God of Massacre Corps. In the Border Control Corps, wherever Dongqing Wudi, the God of Massacre of Zhongzhou State, was the Thunderbolt Battalion. The attack was like fire. The momentum was like thunder, breaking the sky. The Divine Shield Corps was defeated all the way, and the Black Dragon army kept rushing. By the time President Jia Delan talked to Dongqing Wudi, there were less than 60,000 people left of the 80,000 people of the Black Dragon army, while the nearly 200,000 troops of the Divine Shield Corps were defeated, and now there were less than 20,000 people left. There were no prisoners. The death of some soldiers was not even a sacrifice. When the defeat was at its peak, what the losers would encounter was the most brutal slaughter. The defeat of the Divine Shield Corps also meant that the land of Snow Country thousands of miles in the direction of Zhongzhou State would become extremely empty, because several corps along the way had already sent troops to Mormons, and this empty distance was the distance from the border to Kamos, the capital of Snow Country. Along the way, Snow Country could barely gather tens of thousands of soldiers, but how could the Black Dragon army care about such a small number? With Dongqing Wudi in charge, the Black Dragon army was completely insufferably arrogant. Dongqing Wudi said that he would have tea with President Jia Delan in the palace of Snow Country within 24 hours. A distance of thousands of miles. Even if the tens of thousands of soldiers of the Black Dragon army died, they would follow Dongqing Wudi to the palace of Snow Country. No one doubted this. So in less than an hour after the call, several top staff officers of the military of Snow Country had already arrived outside the palace. President Jia Delan gathered everyone together and held an impromptu meeting. The battle in Mormons was still in a stalemate. The plan to send troops into Reki City was almost aborted. In the rear, the Black Dragon army was sweeping the land of Snow Country like a ferocious dragon, staining the land with blood all the way. The extremely serious situation made everyone completely realize that the situation was different. It was no longer a question of how much they could win at the cost. The name Dongqing Wudi now really meant the possibility of Snow Country's defeat in this war. President Jia Delan did not talk nonsense, nor was he in the mood to say anything else. So at the beginning of the meeting, he had already pulled out the battle map of Snow Country in the conference room. The northernmost part of the map, which represented the small area of Mormons, was completely crimson. At the border with Zhongzhou State, there was a large area of conspicuous crimson. Now the crimson was spreading toward the interior of Snow Country, and it was pointing to the capital, Kamos, in an almost straight line. Not far from the crimson region, there were clusters of light blue. These blue dots were moving slowly towards the north. Everyone. President Jia Delan's expression was extremely cold. This is what we are doing now. The battle in Mormons is still in a stalemate, and the combat capability of the Divine Shield Corps is lower than I imagined. The Black Dragon army of the God of Massacre Corps has officially invaded our southern border. According to the speed of their march, it is not entirely impossible for Dongqing Wudi to have tea with me here 24 hours a day. If this becomes true, I believe that Dongqing Wudi will also go to chat with you after having tea with me. There was a commotion in the conference room. They were all the real big shots in the social class of Snow Country. With the destruction of the Violet family, the capital of Snow Country was temporarily blank. The palace of Snow Country concentrated its power, and their future would be better. At this time, they suddenly found that the war they started was likely to be attacked by others. Anyone would feel panic. So now is not the time to wrangle with each other. I need each of your suggestions. I hope that you can be responsible for your words, because every decision you make now concerns the future of the Snow Empire, and even the life and death of each of us. The commotion in the conference room gradually turned into an uproar. In the chaos, an old senior staff officer slapped the table and stood up. He said angrily, "The Divine Shield Corps is incompetent. If it weren't for them, how could we be so passive now? We must hold them accountable. I suggest that they be punished, and it must be." Before he could finish his words, President Jia Delan waved his hand and said, "Come on, take General Long Dimi out." I suddenly remembered that the 7th Legion needs a supervisor to go north to Mormons. General Long Dimi is a suitable candidate. Let him go. The palace warriors in the conference room rushed over and helped the old staff officer. Long Dimi's body stiffened, and his face instantly turned pale. "No, you can't do this." The 7th Legion was one of the 2nd Legions launched by Snow Country. Now it was estimated that it had entered the position of Mormons. Letting him supervise the army in that cruel environment was almost tantamount to letting him die. President Jia Delan was expressionless. "I don't want to hear any nonsense now. I just look at what's in front of me, understand? Deal with the Divine Shield Corps." All the senior officials died in battle, and there were less than 20,000 soldiers. Deal with them? Deal with who? Even if the Divine Shield Corps was dealt with, wouldn't Dongqing Woody come? Bullsh *T advice. Get out, get to the front line. I don't need these useless nonsense. Nonsense. Understand? Long Dimi struggled and was dragged out by the palace warriors. In the silence, a middle-aged general stood up. He looked at Jia Delan's face and said cautiously, maybe we can contact the United Nations and sanction Zhongzhou State." No one spoke. Jude Lin looked at him as if he was an idiot. "How to sanction?" he asked indifferently. In the current situation, other countries were eager to see the result of the fight between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country before intervening. The war had just begun. Although it was tragic, other countries were not fools. How could they intervene without a result? And even if those countries were really stupid and righteous once, how could they sanction Zhongzhou State? Zhongzhou State was now the most powerful superpower. How could such a country be sanctioned? War? No country was willing to go to war with Zhongzhou State. Economic sanctions? Every time the currency of Zhongzhou State appreciated or depreciated, it directly affected the economy of the world. The so-called sanctions were nothing more than a joke. The lieutenant general's face turned red. He sat down awkwardly and didn't speak anymore. Everyone was looking at the map. In fact, there was a relatively reliable way at present. It was just that no one had said it for the time being. The red area on the map was the area invaded by Dongqing Woody, and the light red area was his marching route. Around, near, and not far from these areas, there were light blue areas, all of which were Snow Country's own legions. At a rough glance, there were at least 7 or 8 legions in those blue areas, which meant that 7 or 8 legions were rushing to Mormons at this time. If these 7 or 8 legions could stay to stop the defense line, there would be another army of more than 200,000 soldiers. In this way, there would be hope to stop Dongqing Woody. Of course, this method was good. However, if more than 200,000 troops were detained at once, not to mention the impact on the morale of the army when it suddenly retreated on the way to the front line, how could Mormons make up for the lack of more than 200,000 troops? This question was very important, but it involved their own life and death. In fact, the victory or defeat of the war had already been decided. Therefore, there would always be people who would stand up and put forward such a suggestion. After all, this was the only feasible way. However, in such a situation, whoever stood up and said this first was admitting that he was afraid of death. It was okay to be afraid of death. But in the war, how could a soldier be afraid of death? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Once he stood up this time, he would not be able to get his power and status in the future. There was silence. There was a long silence. Until the shrill ringing of the phone was suddenly remembered. Jia Delin's arm trembled. He took the phone from the secretary and listened to it for a while. His eyes became colder and colder. He threw the phone on the desk in front of him and said in a cold tone, "The latest battle report shows that Rus City has fallen. The Divine Shield Corps," he paused and said with great bitterness and difficulty, "the whole army was wiped out." There was an uproar. The crimson-red area on the battle map once again spread forward a certain distance. The distance was actually very small. But Snow Country, which had the largest territory in the world, was actually not big on the map. This stretch of distance made everyone shudder with fear. How could it be so fast? In the uproar, a relatively young staff officer finally stood up. This young man, who should have had a great future in Snow Country, said calmly, "Mr. President, I suggest that we immediately transfer back the 7 Corps in the area near Dongqing Wudi and form a line of defense to protect Kamos." His voice seemed steady, but it was trembling. No one despised this young man for being afraid of death. Everyone looked at him with gratitude. Jia Delin glanced at him and said in a dull tone, "What about Mormons?" "It's more important here," the young staff officer said quietly. "Important? What's important?" Jia Delin asked. He suddenly stood up and roared hysterically, "What's important here?" Because this is the capital? Is there a palace here? If we lose this place, Snow Country will lose face. Bulsh *T. An army of 200,000 people was wiped out in a few hours. F***CKU. Do you have face? Is this place more important than Mormons? If we fail in Mormons, do you idiots know what will happen to Snow Country? Stupid. Idiot. Incompetent. As he roared, everyone lowered their heads, not saying a word. Jia Delin gasped heavily and looked at the silent scene. After a long time, he suddenly laughed. "It seems that you idiots won't have a better suggestion, right?" It was quiet. Jia Delin nodded. "Then, I have a better suggestion." He looked at the young staff officer who was still standing there and said calmly, "Vincent is right. Of course, the capital is important, but compared to Mormons, it's not that we can't compromise here. Even if we compromise, can we defeat Dongqing Wudi by detaining these 7 legions? Who has the confidence? Who has the confidence?" It was still quiet. Jia Delin continued to nod. "Look, we don't have the confidence to defeat Dongqing Wudi, but what if we change our perspective? Who has the confidence to defeat Wulon State?" Everyone raised their heads and looked stunned. Defeat Wulon State? The army of Wulon State was not strong. After the trial day and the date of death, Wulon State's military power and high-level officials suffered heavy losses. Too many people were sure to defeat Wulon State. "I won't admit defeat," Jia Delin said blandly, "so I want to bet with Dongqing Wudi. I believe that the army of Snow Country is a real elite. Give my order." He turned his head to look at the blue light spot on the map and pointed. "Let the 9th Corps and the 14th Corps stand by. Others, continue to go to Mormons." Everyone looked at the screen. On the screen, the positions of the 9th Corps and the 14th Corps were extremely subtle. In everyone's speculation, Jia Delin grinned grimly. "President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State is in Reki City. As long as we take Reki City and capture the president of Zhongzhou State, do you think Dongqing Wudi will continue to march?" In the quiet conference room, a group of high-level officials looked at Jia Delin blankly. No one even objected. There was only one thought in their minds. Crazy. Jia Delin was completely crazy. Jia Delin looked at the map. On the map, the 2 corps he had left were only a few hundred miles away from Reki City, much shorter than the distance that Dongqing Wudi had traveled to the capital of Snow Country. Jia Delin nodded with satisfaction, looked at the crowd around him, and said blandly, "Who wants to go with me?" In the roar, everyone stood up. Not because everyone was willing to go, but because they were shocked. The meaning of this sentence couldn't be simpler. Jia Delan, the president of Snow Country, was going to attack Reki City in person when Dongxing Wudi marched to the capital. The cold wind blew from the barren polar region, bringing with it the broken ice and snow in the polar region. The cold chill seemed to contain endless malice, penetrating into every pore of the body. He walked quietly. It seemed that the war that would last forever had been left behind by him. The desperate shouts and roars of war gradually faded away. Silence enveloped the wilderness. In the empty world, it seemed that only the numb heartbeat was still going on, one beat after another. His heart was completely empty. The scene in front of him was extremely vague. His messy thoughts had become muddle-headed after the intense fluctuation. The numbness covered him with coldness, taking away the low temperature from his body. He could not feel the cold or the pain. When he moved forward, he could not feel any direction or future. It was empty. The whole world had become completely empty. In the deep darkness of the polar night, he staggered and stumbled in the desolate wilderness, like a walking corpse that had completely lost its soul. He didn't know where he was going, what he was doing, or even who he was. The pain in his heart had long since disappeared. His empty thoughts were completely desolate. The obsessions of the past years, whether they were expectations, bitterness, or hatred, all had a meaning of existence after all. But after all the obsessions were completely gone tonight, the so-called world, the so-called everything, seemed to have completely become nothingness. Wherever I went, I would die. Who am I? It didn't matter. The earth began to shake. Flags appeared in the dark and deep night. A dense army surged in front of him. The main battle tanks, which looked like ferocious beasts, opened the way in front. Behind them, military trucks full of troops galloped forward. The army was vast and occupied almost all of his field of vision. He seemed to be unaware of it and walked forward numbly. The barrel of the main battle tank aimed at his body for the first time. In the command room in the center of the truck fleet, his figure also appeared on the screen in front of the general of the Eisen Federation. He was dressed in black, his face was pale, and his eyes were red and dull. Blood stained his black clothes, and a large area of his clothes had completely turned dark red. As he walked, wisps of blood seemed to come out from all over his body. He ignored it and just walked forward, incomparably stupefied. This was an Easterner. The general easily made a judgment. Then he grinned grimly. Tonight, in Eastern Europe, at this moment, any Easterner who was stained with blood had only one end. The general picked up the walkie-talkie in front of the battle map and sneered, "It's a thug from Zhongzhou State. Open fire and kill him." The muzzle of the main battle tank in front of him turned, and the dark muzzle carried a clear sense of death. The general looked at the cruel scene that was about to happen with interest and muttered to himself, "These bastards should all be killed." The cannons of the main battle tanks were about to roar. The general suddenly changed his mind. "Wait." He suddenly said, "No need to open fire. Just run over and crush him directly into meat paste." His eyes were filled with killing intent and extremely wild. The roar of the tank continued to move forward. The vast army rolled over bit by bit. The two sides were getting closer and closer. He was still walking forward without changing his route, and even his expression had not changed slightly. Countless people in the first batch of troops from the Eisen Federation who entered Snow Country were watching the scene. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. 100 meters. 50 meters. 20 meters. His eyes had no focus at all. He just moved forward numbly and didn't care about the impending death. The incomparably tall tank rolled over with a rumble with a shadow. 5 meters. Keep moving forward. In the next second, the entire army heard an incomparably clear sound of something being sliced apart. Crack, it was a crisp and clear sound. It was like the sound of an extremely sharp blade cutting into metal in an instant, clear and crisp, without the slightest sense of stagnation. In the line of sight of the Eisen Federation's general, the huge main battle tank at the very front suddenly trembled. A smear of scarlet red rushed into the sky like a fountain. The huge cannon barrel flew up, and the tank stopped. The thick armor seemed to have been cut in half from the middle in an instant. The cannonball inside the tank suddenly exploded, and a large area of fire engulfed the nearby armored vehicles. The roaring sound occupied the entire vision, and the raging fire burned. Only the clear and crisp cutting sound was still ringing. The general blinked his eyes. He didn't feel angry or frightened. What happened in this instant almost violated all his common sense, so he just felt a little absurd, and even suspected that he was hallucinating because he was too nervous about the coming battle. Explosions and raging fire burned in the army. The entire army was dead silent and looked extremely sluggish. In the fire that almost burned the night sky, the numb and stiff figure walked out. He staggered forward like a walking corpse, and cyclones seemed to be condensing around him by instinct. There were more and more cyclones, and then they continued to elongate, turning into tangible and invisible sharp blades. Thousands of sharp blades danced in front of him, spreading to the entire army. As he moved forward, countless sharp blades cut in between the heaven and the earth with incomparable stability. It was a sharp edge that looked fragile but was extremely fierce and sharp to the extreme. Tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, weapons, armor, flesh and blood. As he moved forward, everything in front of him was directly cut apart. Blood, wreckage, and explosions were everywhere. The entire army stopped. The general finally reacted from this nightmarish scene. He picked up the walkie-talkie and loudly ordered the army to start charging, while he rushed out of the truck without hesitation and began to flee in the direction he came from. The sharp blade that filled the space between the heaven and the earth slowly moved forward. All the charges were incomparably futile. The blood wave that rose into the sky was not fast or slow, but it moved forward with incomparable firmness as he moved forward. In less than 15 minutes, the raging fire was still burning. The wilderness became wilderness again. The explosions and gunshots stopped. Countless corpses that were directly cut in two fell to the ground with blood and the wreckage of armaments, densely covering the entire wilderness. He seemed to not know what he had done and walked forward in a daze. He passed the battlefield full of corpses, walked through the wilderness, and passed through the incomparably deserted city. His figure was getting faster and faster unknowingly. The icy wind of the polar region blew over, with a temperature of despair and deathly stillness, enveloping the entire world. The sound of surging waves in front of him faintly came over. It was getting closer and closer. A huge roar sounded on the sea level. A huge warship with an incomparably huge silhouette appeared in his field of vision and sailed into the distance. He walked from the land to the sea. Under the dark sky, the howling wolves that were surging with the icy wind suddenly became silent. The vast ocean within a radius of a kilometer suddenly became lifeless stagnant water. The rising murderous intent swept across the bottom of the sea unconsciously. Fish and shrimp, seaweed, shells, reefs, ice. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Everything was completely cut apart. The vast ocean without the slightest fluctuation gradually turned red. He stepped on the surface of the water and approached the sea. The warship was still moving forward. The lights were dazzling, illuminating the world. It was unknown which country's fleet it belonged to. All the armed personnel were on standby. Their direction was the only military port in Mormons. Judging from the scale, it was a whole fleet. The night and the black clothes merged into one. The sea was stagnant. He walked quietly on the sea for dozens of miles. Along the way, all the creatures in the sea were completely cut by invisible sharp blades, and the blood had dyed the sea red. He stepped on the red seawater and walked toward the fleet. An earth-shattering sound broke out in the vast ocean. The raging fire began to burn on the sea, illuminating the sky. The huge wreckage of the warship sank to the bottom of the sea with countless corpses. The fire, the explosion, and all the ripples were suppressed by the invisible force in an instant. The battlefield disappeared. He stood on the dead sea, watching the blood spread in the water, feeling lost and desperate. In front of him was the boundless ocean, more than thousands of miles long. Behind him was darkness, and there was no way back. In a trance, he seemed to think of the North Island many years ago. He stood on the coastline of the North Island and looked at Mount Dibbing across the sea. She walked under the falling cherry trees. Her eyes were brighter than the evening sunset. The assassin and the Holy Virgin. The cherry blossoms and the sea. His figure was a little shaky, and all his strength began to decline slowly, bit by bit. But the killing intent that was condensed to the extreme began to rise. He felt the pain, and his will gradually became sober. His firm will flickered. He thought of his life, from childhood to adulthood, many people, many things, countless life and death, and countless separations. He thought of Situ Tsanyue, Li Kwangtu, the high spirits when he was young and frivolous, the picturesque rivers and mountains on Mount Dibbing, and the white snow on Mount Taibai. The cherry blossoms on the North Island, the vast sea, and the solemn trial. Pictures flashed in his mind one after another. He looked at the flowers on horseback. He thought of Angel again. The holy land of Italos. All the pictures began to dim and disappear. He suddenly realized that what he remembered most in his life was not Angel. It was not a long time, because it was less than a lifetime. It was not a short time, because he had never died young. What he remembered most clearly was the scene of being separated from Angel and being thrown out of the Holy Land like a dog until today. It was anger, unwillingness, longing, concern, and care. For so many years, all his emotions were obsession. He became stronger at all costs. The only thing he wanted to do was to go to the Holy Land again and bring his woman back. Tribulation. It was obsession in itself. He stood on the sea, and his eyes were burning. That was the raging fire of Mormons. Countless saint warriors were gathering. Her body was nailed to the cross. Blood flowed and floated in the air. The fire was burning, twisting the air. That was the last time. He did not see her face clearly. Her expression. In the space distorted by the fire, the last time, the last time. The only thing he could touch was the vast will. She turned into ashes in the raging fire all over the sky, and the dust drifted all over the sky. She did not even leave a word. They met again after so many years. If she could speak, what would she say? What did she want to say? What else could he say? He thought quietly and finally understood that no matter what she would say, it was no longer important. Because she was gone. He began to cry again. Standing on the vast sea, surrounded by the vast and silent ocean, the night fell and merged with the black seawater. The murderous aura continued to spread. It was not until this moment that he really realized that he really had nothing left. He stood quietly, no longer moving forward, no longer pursuing, as if he would stand until the end of time. Until a voice sounded in his ear. It was peaceful, indifferent, calm, and casual. This low voice easily pierced through his killing intent and appeared in his ears. "Are you waiting for me?" He did not respond. The voice sounded again, "Can you stop me?" He raised his head and looked ahead. Wang Tianzong, in a black costume and carrying a huge sword, walked over from the sea. He crossed the mountains, walked across the plains, and crossed the sea. 1,000 miles were behind him, but he was not tired at all. Instead, his spirit became more and more vigorous. Tribulation's eyes were a little confused, and his voice was hoarse. "She is dead." Wang Tianzong was stunned and then fell silent. It didn't matter who Tribulation was talking about. What mattered was that there was only despair and emptiness in his tone. He could not understand such a feeling, but more than 20 years ago, at a certain moment, he felt the same way. Wang Tianzong looked at Tribulation and felt his rising and completely out of control killing intent. His state was declining, but the condensed killing intent with endless sharpness had broken through the scope of the half-step chosen one and truly reached the supreme domain. His eyes were a little emotional. When he was young, Tribulation had been with him for a while. At that time, he and Li Kwangtu were still brothers. He and Tribulation were not friends. But Li Guangtu and Situ Tsanyue's younger brother was also his younger brother at that time. Wang Tianzong thought quietly. At that time, Wang Xiaoyao seemed to have a good relationship with Tribulation. He was also optimistic about Tribulation's future. But he had never thought that when he was at his strongest, the strongest opponent he met in his life turned out to be Tribulation. Tribulation stood in front of him on the sea. In front of him was his path. "I can understand your mood," Wang Tianzong said slowly. His words were a little pale. Tribulation looked at him blankly, with only confusion. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time before he said again, "Where do you want to go?" "I'll send you." "You?" Tribulation looked at him and smiled bitterly. "You want to send me? Is there anyone else who can send me?" "I can," Wang Tianzong said lightly. Tribulation's smile grew bigger and bigger, but also more and more bleak. The last tear flowed through his eyes and down his cheek. Falling. He opened his mouth softly and said vaguely and hoarsely, "Okay." Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually burned and were extremely bright. His voice sounded clear and faint. "Have a good trip." Tears fell into the vast sea. Ripples appeared on the still surface of the water. The ripples spread out. Under the dark sky, the whole sea area roared wildly in an instant. Monstrous waves rushed to the sky thousands of meters high in an instant, and water drops with sword intent covered the sky. Tribulation let go of everything and rushed directly to Wang Tianzong. The space was completely shattered by the killing intent. Light and shadow suddenly lit up in the endless darkness and silence. Tribulation's martial arts began to collapse. All his strength retreated to the chi-controlling realm, and then rose wildly. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm. He entered the invincible realm in an instant. The peak of the invincible realm. Half-step chosen one. Supremacy. An unprecedented glory and pinnacle gathered on his body. Monstrous waves surged and gathered as he rose. Tribulation opened his hands. At this moment, he held almost the entire Arctic Ocean in his hands. In the shortest time, the huge wave rushed across the sky of tens of thousands of meters, like a roaring gathering rising from the sea. With condensed sword intent, it broke through the space, devoured the void, and directly arrived in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong pulled out the huge sword behind him. Coldness of 9 states. Buzz. A clear sound suddenly rang out between the sky and the sea. The black huge sword appeared clearly in Tribulation's sight through the huge waves tens of thousands of meters away. Everything engraved on the blade seemed to light up. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, and everything in the world. They were all reincarnated. They were all one sword. This sword was here. Wang Tianzong's figure seemed to be standing in another world. He pulled out the sword in another world. The sun and moon were above his head, and the rivers, lakes, and seas were all trembling. That was the most essential sword. A simple, pure sword. The sharpness that filled the world gathered on the sword edge, smashing the night sky and tearing the huge waves. The sword energy kept filling his eyes. It was extremely real, but also extremely illusory. Light and darkness were constantly alternating in this sword. Between day and night, the extremely explosive sword energy instantly arrived in front of Tribulation. Boom! In the extremely loud roar, the sea surface tens of thousands of meters around suddenly sank. There seemed to be a scorching sun in the dark night sky. It was illusory and real. The sun, moon, and stars were all sword light. The sea area tens of thousands of meters turned into a huge vortex under the completely boiling sword energy. The vortex kept spinning on the sea level, and every drop of water carried the alternating light and darkness of the sword light. The most perfect sword intent. The most extreme outbreak. 6 paths of reincarnation sword. The coldness of 9 states, which was used with all its strength for the first time, trembled slightly with extremely clear excitement. Wang Tianzong stood in the sky and looked down at the sea area. There were no huge waves in the sea area, and there was no tribulation. Only the vortex was left. Only the ocean was left. His body moved and slowly withdrew the sword. A faint sound came. He lowered his head. A gash appeared in his hand, bringing with it fresh blood. The blood flowed into the coldness of 9 states and was absorbed by the sword. Wang Tianzong looked at his palm. After a long time, he raised it gently. He raised his arm little by little. The process was very slow. With his movement, there were countless cracks on his palms, wrists, legs, face, and almost every part of his body. The sharpness tore his skin. In an instant, Wang Tianzong was covered in blood. He put the coldness of 9 states behind him again. Wang Tianzong's figure in the sky suddenly fell down, and a large mouthful of blood instantly sprayed out. His face was pale, but he was laughing, extremely comfortable. His body fell in the center of the vortex in the sea and he opened his hands. At this moment, between the sky and the sea, everything revolved around him and was in the palm of his hand. The emblem of the Wang family of Beihai was the sky and the sea. And today, August 24th. Between the sky and the sea, Wang Tianzong finally crossed the boundary and made up for all his imperfections. In the final outbreak of tribulation, he officially entered the supreme realm. Moreover, flawless. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes. The loud and vigorous heartbeat swept through the waves and resounded through the world. All the wounds on his body began to heal. His aura was completely stable, far better than before. With the endless sword intent, like a whirlpool of reincarnation, he disappeared on the sea level. Wang Tianzong turned around. Across the sea and the mountains. He looked at Mormons, who was getting closer and closer to him. The city that had become a purgatory was everything he wanted to conquer. "I'm coming," he whispered. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 595. The reason why lunatics were called lunatics was because they dared to do it, could do it, and were willing to do things that ordinary people would not even consider. Countless histories had clearly shown one truth. There was only half a step between insanity and stupidity, and similarly, there was only half a step between insanity and wisdom. The flames of war filled the air, and smoke was everywhere. The turmoil that was enough to topple all of Eastern Europe continued to spread. As the longest-serving president in the history of Snow Empire, as the initiator of this war that was enough to be recorded in the history books, when the higher-ups of Snow Empire were considering life and death, Jia Delan only considered success or failure. Dongxing Wudi commanded his army to go north, and his sword pointed straight at Kalmas. The situation was so clear. The Black Dragon army unreservedly vented their sharpness and combat power in Snow Country, telling the world their terrifying combat power. There were several legions of Snow Country along the way from the border to Kalmas, but no one could guarantee that these legions could stop Dongxing Wudi. Moreover, leaving these legions was equivalent to compromising with Mormon's battle situation. No one could predict the consequences, and no one could bear the responsibility. Jia Delan thought that this war was the best time for him to get his hands on enough chips. To put it bluntly, he couldn't afford to lose in the face of variables. Dongxing Wudi was unstoppable. The only thing he could do was to fight for time. If he couldn't beat Dongxing Wudi, he would race against time with him. The strong and iron-blooded order was directly issued to all military bases in Snow Country as soon as the meeting ended. Almost all the fighter jets that could be on standby received specific orders. Snow Country's satellites and radars began to monitor all of Eastern Europe. Snow Country, which claimed to have the largest spy network in the world, launched all the spies and agents, and the follow-up means were turned over one by one. Blocking the airspace of Eastern Europe. Blockade the land of Eastern Europe. Immediately, the huge naval fleet of Snow Country began to set out to sea. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State was in Reki City. Since he wanted to compete with Dongxing Wudi for the world, he must ensure that Li Huaqing could not leave Eastern Europe. Only in this way could all this make sense. In the process of conveying all the orders, the president of Snow Country, Jia Delan, had already flown directly to the encampment of the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps by helicopter. When Dongxing Wudi wanted to defeat Kalmas, the president of Snow Country, Jia Delan, had already begun to carry out the plan to capture Li Huaqing alive without hesitation. Everything was moving forward. Life and death, victory and defeat, there was no turning back. Jia Delan knew very well what this battle meant. It meant the fate of the Snow Empire, and it also meant his own future. In his heart, this was an equally important matter. Eastern Europe, August 24th, afternoon. When Dongxing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, went more than 200 miles deep into Snow Country, President Jia Delan of Snow Country left the 7th and 14th Corps of Snow Country to conquer Wulan State. In the second hour, the 70,000-strong army encountered a division of the Arctic Ocean Command that had been scattered. The 70,000-strong army was like a ferocious tiger. In less than an hour, they annihilated the defeated soldiers of the Arctic Ocean Command and then began to charge at full speed. The chaos had reached its peak. With the actions of Dongxing Wudi and Jia Delan, the entire international situation began to become complicated and tense. Reki City, Manlisai Hotel. The banquet, which had an incomparably grand beginning but an incomparably chaotic process, continued. The resplendent hall was filled with soft music. One by one, the clan leaders, who were still full of ambition yesterday, began to vent their negative emotions in the hall. Irritation, anger, resentment, fear, and even regret appeared on their faces. Everyone had already known the news of last night. After all, the blockade of Wulan State was not thorough enough. When the first clan leader of a wealthy family learned the news of the war in Eastern Europe, the bad news spread to the whole audience like a plague. Everyone was anxiously waiting for the news. However, after Wulan State learned its lesson, the news was blocked very well this time. All the clan leaders of the wealthy families present were almost under house arrest in the banquet hall. As time went by, the clan leaders of the wealthy families, who did not know the scale of the war for the time being, kept speculating about the news. Their moods also became more and more chaotic in the speculation, and then they lost their composure. At lunchtime, the hotel provided exquisite food. Wulan State was famous for its beauties all over the world. The waiters carefully selected by the hotel had the capital to make people's eyes light up. However, no matter for beauties or delicacies, these clan leaders were not in the mood to enjoy them now. After a clan leader of a wealthy family talked to a waiter with a smile but did not get any useful reply, the clan leader, who was almost completely crushed by the inner pressure overnight, completely turned hostile. He slapped the waiter's delicate and white face and shouted abuse. The situation in the banquet hall suddenly became chaotic. As soon as the chaos appeared, it became calm. A large number of soldiers of Wulan State with live ammunition poured into the hall. The soldier at the front pulled the trigger against the ceiling. As soon as the gunshot sounded, the whole hall suddenly became quiet. The neat soldiers separated the crowd and moved forward. Finally, they guarded around the high platform in the center of the banquet. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who was tightly protected, walked up to the high platform and looked down. His eyes were dignified and solemn. He knocked on the microphone. Everyone, his voice echoed in the conference room. I'm here to announce bad news. About 3 hours ago, the war in most areas of Eastern Europe was over. In the extremely silent atmosphere, only Li Huaqing's voice sounded. Snow Country and their allies have won. Some people looked embarrassed, some were pale, some had dim eyes, and some looked panicked. They were the clan leaders of wealthy families all over Eastern Europe. Now the war in most areas of Eastern Europe had ended, and Snow Country had won. What about their families and foundations? The worst news is that we've got the exact information. This night, it's not just you who were attacked. Some wealthy families who didn't come to Reki City were also targeted by the coalition forces of Snow Country, such as this one. He raised his hand, and a photo that everyone was familiar with appeared on the screen of the banquet hall. Patriarch Clive. Li Huaqing said in a deep voice, his family is stronger than many of the families here, and it has never had any political inclination in the past. Zhongzhou State has no contact with the Clive family. But when the war broke out, the soldiers of Snow Country broke into the Clive family. 4 hours ago, Patriarch Clive surrendered and signed a series of property transfer agreements. 3.5 hours ago, Patriarch Clive was shot in his family headquarters. According to the current news, his beautiful wife and daughter have disappeared. A cold and stiff atmosphere suddenly broke out in the silence. F***CK. Damn it. These bastards. In the hustle and bustle, everyone had a feeling of sympathy. It was not difficult to imagine Clive's mood when he signed the family property transfer agreement, and it was not difficult to imagine the humiliation he would suffer after his wife and daughter were missing. Li Huaqing's voice was still calm. There are many such examples. I have no other meaning in saying this. I just want to tell you that there were many reasons for the situation to develop to this point. But the war last night had little to do with your choice to stand by Zhongzhou State. Snow Country launched the war because they wanted to establish a new order, that's all. I have issued an order through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Zhongzhou State and given a warning to Snow Country. So, everyone, you should feel lucky, because you are now friends, partners, and even your own people of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State has the obligation to protect you. Snow Country and their allies want your industries. With the warning from Zhongzhou State first, before you fall into their hands, your families may be under house arrest or locked up, but at least they won't die mysteriously, and they won't suffer humiliation that they shouldn't have. All the patriarchs of the wealthy families in the banquet hall were silent. Everyone was looking at Li Huaqing with complicated eyes, but the atmosphere in the banquet hall was much better than before. At least the strength of Zhongzhou State was something that all the wealthy families could rest assured about. Li Huaqing casually waved his hand and said, "Everyone, the war is not over yet. I, the standing minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Marshal Dongqing Wudi, has now led tens of thousands of elites of the Black Dragon Army to penetrate hundreds of miles into the territory of Snow Country. It is estimated that Marshal Dongqing will reach Kalmas in 24 hours. And the latest news is that Jia Delan is desperate. At present, he is personally leading 2 legions to Reki City. Snow Country is racing against time with Marshal Dongqing. You should all know what this means. Jia Delan wants to capture not only me but also the delegation I brought with me, because those hundreds of people are also important figures in Zhongzhou State. Similarly, he also wants to capture you alive. What I said is the truth, and I want to emphasize that from now on, I will not leave this hall. The war is going on. Everyone, Zhongzhou State is taking the same risks as you. And the outcome of the war depends on the speed of Marshal Dongqing and Jia Delan, on the decisive battle in Mormons, and also on you. At this time, if you have any means that you haven't used, there is no need to hide them now. In a few hours, a dozen hours, I hope to still be here to celebrate our victory with you. At that time, the cake in front of us will be the whole of Eastern Europe. Heaven and hell had always been separated by only a thin line. This banquet had now become a complete gamble. The loser would lose all their possessions and their families. The winner would get endless benefits from all of Eastern Europe. Li Huaqing walked down the platform and said, "If anyone wants to quit or seek refuge in Snow Country at this time, you can leave. In the name of Zhongzhou State, I will not stop you." His figure walked to the lounge at the back of the banquet hall. The patriarchs of the wealthy families in the hall did not move. In the subtle silence, someone finally began to take out their mobile phones. The mobile phone signal had been restored. One call after another was made to all corners of Eastern Europe. The hidden means of the wealthy families began to ferment gradually. Behind the banquet hall was a row of corridors. There were boxes on both sides, which were lounges. It was also a place to talk about some major projects and cooperation. The soldiers escorting Li Huaqing stopped in front of the corridor. Li Huaqing walked to his lounge alone. His expression was still calm, but his eyes were full of solemnity. By now, the chaos in Eastern Europe was no longer a conflict in the dark world, but a large-scale war involving the whole of Eastern Europe. Zhongzhou state had been completely involved. The winner would live, the loser would die, and the way to retreat had completely disappeared. At this time, he suddenly missed the Snowdance Corps, which had been frozen on the parade square by Wang Tianzong's sword. If the Snowdance Corps of more than 10,000 people could move freely at this time, the entire Reki city would have at least 100,000 more troops. What was there to fear about the 2 legions of Snow Country? Passing the corner. A clear and melodious laughter rang out. It was the laughter of a young girl, delicate, mellow, and carefree. Along with the girl's laughter, the middle-aged man bragged triumphantly, "Daughter, you don't know that I was standing at the gate of the group at that time." Merson and the leaders of several other consortia bent over and walked down the steps. They even wanted to shake hands with me. Ha ha ha, it's a joke. Agreed? How could I agree? I wouldn't agree. The old guy, Merson, almost knelt down to me. Later, in less than 3 months, I directly bought nearly 70% of the 4 consortia's industries, and then sold them and made a lot of money. Li Huaqing was in a daze. He knew what the other party was talking about. However, at this time and in this kind of atmosphere, it was really inconceivable to hear such a conversation. How heartless must one be to brag here when war and artillery could come at any time? He passed the corner and turned his head to take a look. In his sight, Han Donglu, the boss of Zhongzhou State's Flourishing Age Fund, was standing in the corridor with his daughter, Han Xinyan, talking smugly about his past when he was young. Li Huaqing shook his head subconsciously. He knew what Han Donglu had just said. It was many years ago when the Flourishing Age Fund had just risen. At that time, Li Huaqing was still working in Liaodong. The so-called Merson was a financial tycoon in Eastern Europe many years ago and also the most important stepping stone in the rise of the Flourishing Age Fund. The financial war between the newly rising Flourishing Age Fund and Merson's Angel Fund could be said to be really thrilling. Although there was no fighting, every detail was full of unconstrained intelligence. After the end of the war, the Flourishing Age Fund expanded into a real behemoth almost overnight. Today, that war was still regarded as an unsurpassable legend by the industry. He did have the capital to brag about this matter, not to mention that he was bragging to his own woman. It didn't matter if it was exaggerated. But the point was, didn't Boss Han feel that the occasion was wrong? Han Xinyan saw Li Huaqing's figure and pointed her white and tender finger at her father. Han Donglu leisurely turned around with a glass of red wine in his hand and happened to see Li Huaqing shaking his head. He was slightly stunned, coughed dryly, and smiled awkwardly. "Mr. President, I'm sorry. Don't mention it. What Boss Han just said is true. The battle between the Flourishing Age Fund and the Angel Fund has been used as a teaching material by all the major funds. If you want to talk about flattery, they are more exaggerated than you." Li Huaqing joked. Han Donglu laughed and was high-spirited. When his wealth reached such a level, he could really be regarded as rich as a country. In front of anyone, he could freely withdraw and release his wealth. Those people outside should have started to move, right? These wealthy families have been developing in Eastern Europe for many years. Now, although they have suffered setbacks on the surface, who knows how many secret means they have? They are the real local tyrants. The current war is just an opportunity for them to use all their secret means. If they hide it this time, the next time they take it out, it is estimated that they will deal with Zhongzhou State. Han Donglu shook his head, looked at Li Huaqing, and gave him a thumbs up. "Good move, President." Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and shook his head with a smile. "I'm just telling the truth. There must be hidden dangers if these people are locked up here. In that case, it's better to tell them the truth and let them play by themselves. Maybe it will work. Anyway, I'm not lying." After removing the communication shield, they know what they should do. He paused, turned to look at Han Donglu, and said thoughtfully, "Boss Han, you don't seem to be worried at all?" In such a chaotic situation, with Han Donglu's status, he should be the most worried one. In terms of wealth, Han Donglu could be said to have reached the peak. If Snow Country broke through Reki City before Dongqing Wudi, apart from Li Huaqing, Han Donglu could be said to be the most valuable target. If Snow Country could plunder all the wealth of the Flourishing Age Fund, it would be enough to make up for the internal turmoil of Snow Country after the loss of the Violet family. It could even make up for the loss of this war. Maybe it could also increase military expenses for a few years or even longer. Of course, at that time, Han Donglu and even Han Xinyan would also end up horribly. What are you worried about? Han Donglu was a little puzzled. The 2 legions of Snow Country are now on the way to Reki City. Jia Delan is leading them in person. Li Huaqing said calmly. Han Donglu nodded. Oh, 2 legions. His voice was casual and flat. The 2 legions led by Jia Delan were understated in his words, as if Li Huaqing had just said that he had eaten 2 eggs not long ago. They can't come over. What are you worried about? Han Donglu took out a cigarette and handed it to Li Huaqing. He sighed and said, "It's a tragedy for Jia Delan. He wants to die, but he doesn't have the chance." Li Huaqing took the cigarette and was a little stunned. Why can't they come over? Because they have too few people. Han Donglu's tone was extremely calm. There are only 2 legions. Does Jia Delan think that he can compete with Marshal Dongqing by leading them in person? He shook his head. Are you kidding me? Han Xinyan took the room card and opened the door of the box. Han Donglu walked in, turned around, and said with a smile, "President, would you like to come in and have a seat? I have a bottle of good wine here." Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment and looked at Han Donglu. He really couldn't figure out where the other party's inexplicable confidence came from. The 2 legions of Snow Country had nearly 70,000 people. This was not a large number, but it was definitely not a small number. The base of the Arctic Ocean Command in Im was scattered at the beginning of the war. The entire Arctic Ocean Command was not prepared at the beginning. In addition, Commander Cheng Huining had just taken office. In the command of the battle, although his orders were sound, they had changed. Now the entire Arctic Ocean Command was scattered. As for the 4 countries around Wulan State, Oga State and Ross State were in the direction of the March of Snow Country. These 2 countries were small countries. In the past, they advanced and retreated together with Wulan State. Moreover, Ross, Oga, and Wulan State had been severely ravaged by the Snowdance Corps. The armies of the 3 countries had suffered heavy losses. To put it bluntly, the only obstacle between Jia Delan and Reki City was not the troops along the way. There were almost no troops along the way. The only obstacle between the 2 was actually the distance. And every minute and every second, the distance was shortening. If not, Jia Delan would not be crazy enough to compete with Dongqing Wudi in speed. After all, a madman was not an idiot. Mr. President? Han Donglu stood outside the door and shouted again, "Don't you want to come and sit down?" No. Li Huaqing came to his senses, suppressed his inner doubts, and smiled. I have something to do. Han Donglu nodded and closed the door. He turned around and found that his daughter was looking at him with great curiosity, and the look in her eyes was extremely strange. Han Donglu touched his face subconsciously. What's wrong? Old Han, are you really not worried? Han Xinyan was silent for a while, and then suddenly asked, The army of Snow Country is coming here. Aren't you also not worried? Han Donglu laughed. He walked to the computer and turned it on. He casually looked at the stock trend chart on the screen, picked up the mouse, and operated it in boredom. I'm not worried because of you, okay? Han Xinyan rolled her eyes and poured a cup of tea for Han Donglu. Han Donglu took the tea, took a sip, and shook his head subconsciously. Eastern Europe was different from Zhongzhou State. Because of the environment, tea could almost be regarded as a luxury. Even the so-called special tea provided by the Manlisai Hotel was too far from his taste. Han Xinyan propped her cheeks and looked at her father. Her quiet and beautiful face was filled with confusion. You are my father. You are here and you said that everything will be fine. Of course, I won't worry, because you will be there to support me no matter what happens. I thought it was okay, but the president just had a lot on his mind. I could feel that he was also nervous. The patriarchs and big shots outside are all nervous and afraid. I don't look down on them, because I know that they are different from me. If something really happens, no one will support them. On the contrary, they have to support the people standing behind them. Old Han, you are the same, but why are you not worried and nervous? Han Donglo's hand holding the mouse paused, and then he said with a smile, as I said, because they have too few people, don't worry. But we have very few people, too. Han Xinyan stared at her father. After a long silence, she whispered, Dad, I'm a little scared. Han Donglu narrowed his eyes. An inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes. In the extremely complicated chart, he reached out his hand and clicked the mouse twice casually. Then he touched his daughter's hair with the other hand. Don't worry. He said softly, it's okay. Han Xinyan ignored him. She stared blankly at the stock that Han Donglu had manipulated and muttered to herself, Old Han, are you really senile? You will lose money if you do this. What do you mean? Han Donglu was stunned. He took a deep look at his daughter and whispered, that's what I mean. He walked to the window with the teacup and opened it. Reki City, which had been disturbed by the wind and rain for several days, finally welcomed the sunshine. It was bright and warm, and the sky was clear. Han Donglu looked at the sky and was silent for a long time. At this time, he was no longer the middle-aged uncle who laughed when bragging to his daughter. His thin figure stood in front of the window, with an incomparably deep power. A melodious chime came from the wall clock in the private room. Han Donglu looked down at his watch and muttered to himself, at this time, it's almost time to enter the market. When he walked into his own lounge, the secretary was answering the phone with a serious look. Li Huaqing sat on the sofa and waved his hands silently, motioning for the secretary to continue. He poured a cup of tea himself, leaned against the sofa, and closed his eyes to rest. The secretary quickly hung up. He quickly walked to Li Huaqing's side and whispered, President, it's a call from the Prime Minister. Li Huaqing sat up slightly. What did the Prime Minister say? The Prime Minister hopes that you can leave Reki City. He said that this is the common wish of all comrades. In addition, I also received calls from the old Minister Dongcheng, Minister Qi Baitsong, Headmaster Zhuang Huayang, and even some retired old comrades, such as Senior Li. At this time, everyone thinks that you should leave Eastern Europe. The secretary's tone was extremely slow. Li Huaqing was silent and did not speak. The secretary looked at his face and said, in addition, Marshal Dongqing has called you 3 times to express the same meaning. Eastern Europe has currently blocked the airspace and sea area. But if you want to leave temporarily, the Arctic Ocean Command has a secret base in Eastern Europe. The military will arrange for you to leave temporarily. Li Huaqing glanced at him. With a smile in his eyes, he asked, what do you think? The secretary hesitated for a moment. Just as he was about to speak, the phone suddenly rang again. He took out his mobile phone and looked at it, hesitating a little. It's Marshal Dongqing. Oh, Li Huaqing said, waved his hand, and said, don't answer it first. Cut the video. The secretary nodded, hung up the phone, and went to operate the screen. A few minutes later, Dongqing Wudi's figure appeared on the screen in front of Li Huaqing. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, who almost overturned the entire southern part of Snow Country, was covered in blood. His face had been washed. After wiping it with a towel, he became clean again and even looked a little younger. But his eyes were full of solemnity. President, I suggest you leave Reki City immediately. Without any courtesy, after saluting, he went straight to the point and said, the secret base of the Arctic Ocean Command is about 400 miles away from Reki City. I will arrange reliable people, you can't go. Li Huaqing directly interrupted Dongqing Wudi's words. Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment and then fell silent. After a long time, he whispered, a gentleman doesn't stand on a dangerous wall, I'm not a gentleman. Li Huaqing said with a smile, I'm the president of Zhongzhou State. No matter where I am, I represent Zhongzhou State. I'm invincible. In such a situation, what's the point of me leaving? Comrades will understand. Dongqing Wudi's voice was low. They will understand, but no one will really understand. Li Huaqing whispered, it may not be difficult to retreat, but if I leave, it will represent the compromise of Zhongzhou State. Not to mention whether the morale of the army will be affected, even Wulon State will be in chaos in an instant. I can leave, but how can the people I brought leave? If these people fall into the hands of Snow Country, it will also be a disaster for Zhongzhou State. In fact, for Zhongzhou State, what's so important about me? The most important thing is the president. If I really die here, the Snow Empire will soon have a new president. Perhaps there will be chaos for a period of time, but as long as you defeat the Snow Empire, the chaos within the country will not cause too much waves. He looked at Dongqing Wudi and smiled. Remember why I told you I was so satisfied with Tianlan? It's still the same now. He has always been the most satisfactory candidate for the state-protecting war god. Gu Xingyan will compromise and make concessions, but he is not strong enough. The Wang family of Beihai is tough enough, but in Wang Tianzong's heart, the Wang family of Beihai is more important than Zhongzhou State. Tianlan is different. He will never choose, and he has no choice. So no matter what is ahead, he will rush forward. In fact, most of the time, everyone's situation is the same. Tianlan carries the Li family on his back and will not retreat. Behind you are tens of thousands of troops, and behind me is the whole Zhongzhou State. Standing at such a height, we can't compromise, and we can't afford to compromise. I will stand here. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said firmly, no matter what the outcome is, I must stand here, even if I die. Both at home and abroad, my successors will know that the president of Zhongzhou State is not a position that can be retreated or compromised. Dongqing Wudi did not speak for a long time. Li Huaqing suddenly laughed. In those days, the Li family's young and young highnesses swept across Eastern Europe and created the momentum of Eastern Europe. Now you and your precious son-in-law are also sweeping across Eastern Europe and creating momentum. It's so similar. In a few years, this may be another legend. Momentum. It's easy to get it, but it's even easier to lose it. But it's not easy for Zhongzhou State to have the current situation. If I retreat, Zhongzhou State's momentum in Eastern Europe will be gone, so, needless to say. He looked at the screen and said word by word, I won't retreat. Dongqing Wudi was completely silent. When Jia Delan was thinking about victory or defeat, in the face of such a situation, the president of Zhongzhou State was thinking about life and death. He would not die. Even if Snow Country really attacked Reki City, Jia Delan did not dare to kill Li Huaqing. But at this moment, the president of Zhongzhou State said word by word that he would die. What this meant was self-evident. Dongqing Wudi did not say much in the end. He silently hung up the phone. The screen went black. Li Huaqing leaned on the sofa, closed his eyes, and hummed softly. In the temporarily modified carriage, looking at the darkened screen and Dongqing Wudi, all the high-level members of the Black Dragon Army did not speak. The army was rushing forward madly, like a torrent, like a huge wave, a raging tide, drowning everything. Dongqing Wudi's voice slowly sounded after a long silence. Did you hear that? No one spoke, but every high-level member of the Black Dragon Army straightened up. The president won't retreat. Dongqing Wudi slowly said, what should we do? All the high-level members took a step forward at the same time. Dongqing Wudi was expressionless. His face was tense, and every pore was full of killing intent and violence. Charge! The next second, in the mighty Black Dragon Army, everyone heard the almost crazy roar from the commander. Full speed ahead. Black Dragon Army, charge! The mighty military truck ran fast on the road. Jia Delan sat in the spacious carriage, watching the army's marching route and the battle reports from all over, his face extremely cold. The spacious truck had now become the hub of the whole Snow Country. Countless pieces of important news were gathering in this place. Important news. And all of them were bad news. 5 hours ago, the Fifth Fleet of Snow Country was completely annihilated. 2 hours ago, the Black Dragon army of Zhongzhou State broke through the city of Seine. An hour ago. Mormons. The 13th Corps was completely annihilated. Half an hour ago, Li Tianlan's motorcade officially entered the Mormons area. At the same time, the Purgatory God of Heaven capital personally took action. The sword light was magnificent and illuminated the whole city. The elites of the Polar Ground Alliance suffered heavy losses. Countless pieces of bad news came one after another. And the only good news was from Jia Delan. The 7th Corps and the 14th Corps of Snow Country were extremely fast. In the full-speed charge, the army had run over Im and rushed into Ross State. Although the few remaining troops of Ross State resisted desperately, they were completely dispersed in a short time. Jia Delan did not even arrange for people to chase after the defeated soldiers. He and his army all focused their eyes in the direction of Reki City. Move forward, keep moving forward. The screen in the carriage was slightly separated. The video of Dongqing Wudi marching into Kammas appeared at the same time as Jia Delan marching into Reki City. Everyone who saw these two routes heaved a sigh of relief. The Arctic Ocean Command was broken up and temporarily unable to support. The military forces of Ross State and Oga State were extremely weak. At this moment, when Dongqing Wudi was less than 400 miles away from Kammas, Jia Delan's army was less than 200 kilometers away from Reki City. In the end, Snow Country won the war for time. Jia Delan's expression was still tense, but the people around him had already smiled. Mr. President, maybe we can get in touch with Reki City now. A major general staff officer came over, looking a little relaxed. Dongqing Wudi was less than 400 miles away from Kammas. In Kammas City, there were about 8,000 palace warriors and nearly 20,000 capital troops. Dongqing Wudi now had only a little more than 50,000 available elites. It would take time to defeat these two elites. This time was enough for Snow Country to completely crush Reki City. Contact, Jia Delan murmured. Yes, it's to practice them and negotiate. The staff officer was full of confidence. Zhongzhou State should have seen the situation clearly. According to our people's report, Li Huaqing has not left Reki City so far. Now Li Huaqing and the lives of countless big shots in Zhongzhou State are in our hands. We can kill them all, but I personally suggest that we cooperate with Zhongzhou State. President Jia Delan glanced at the staff officer coldly and did not speak. Now the situation in Mormons is not optimistic. We can pretend to cooperate with Zhongzhou State, transfer Dongqing Wudi's army to Mormons, and let them break the deadlock for us. Then we can secretly mobilize the army and complete the encirclement of Mormons. At that time, we can wipe out the Black Dragon Battalion and even kill Dongqing Wudi. Jia Delan narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Indeed, they could not solve the problem even if they were faster than Dongqing Wudi. At most, they could relieve the pressure that Dongqing Wudi brought to Snow Country. But even if they caught Li Huaqing, the deadlock in Mormons was still in a stalemate. Even if they forced the Beihai Corps and Li Tianlan's motorcade, the battlefield would still be chaotic. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Samsara Palace, and Snow Country would fight to the death. In fact, on the battlefield, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Beihai Corps, and the Samsara Palace were also fighting each other. The withdrawal of these two forces would only make the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital kill fewer targets. But if they cooperated with Zhongzhou State, Jia Delan frowned and felt a little disgusted. He instinctively disliked the word cooperation. The staff officer immediately understood. He smiled and said, cooperation may not be accurate. After all, the president of Zhongzhou State is in our hands. To be exact, we should coerce Zhongzhou State to cooperate with our actions. Jia Delan's brows loosened slightly. He thought for a moment and ordered, contact Dongqing Wudi. At this distance, everyone could be completely sure that Dongqing Wudi could no longer catch up with Jia Delan's speed. Even if he defeated Kamos, Li Huaqing, and countless important figures of Zhongzhou state would also fall into Jia Delan's hands. At this time, Jia Delan really wanted to see Dongqing Wudi's expression. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, strong and iron-blooded, had been strong for most of his life. Therefore, in the current situation, Jia Delan very much hoped to see Dongqing Wudi bow his head and admit defeat. The staff officer personally arranged the call. The call rang and was immediately hung up. The staff officer was stunned and tried again. The call was ringing. Then, he hung up. It was self-evident what it meant. The staff officer looked a little embarrassed and said hesitantly, the other party refused to talk to us. Jia Delan snorted heavily. He thought for a moment and said, "Stop the car and let the soldiers rest in place for half an hour. Contact Wulan State. I want to talk to Li Huaqing." After all, Li Huaqing was not Dongqing Wudi. Therefore, the call was extremely smooth. In less than 5 minutes, the two presidents of the superpowers, who were less than 200 miles apart, had already seen each other through a screen. "Hello, President Li Huaqing." Jia Delan's expression was calm and indifferent. It was a completely confident posture. Li Huaqing smiled. "I'm curious." His voice was low. "At this time, our two countries are at war. I don't think it's necessary for us to talk. I think it's enough." Jia Delan said calmly, "Your Excellency, I'm less than 200 miles away from Reki City now. Do you know what this means? I don't think you can come over." Li Huaqing thought for a moment and said calmly. Jia Delan sneered. "I can bet with you that within 3 hours, my army and I will enter Reki City. Your god of massacre said that he wanted to have tea with me in the palace of Snow Country. Maybe he can't realize his dream, but 3 hours later, I can have tea with you. Your Excellency, how do you feel?" Li Huaqing shrugged and did not speak. "You still have a choice now." Jia Delan said calmly, "Before I get to Reki City, you still have a lot of time to consider the cooperation between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. As long as the Arctic Ocean Command withdraws from Eastern Europe, Zhongzhou State helps Snow Country win Mormons and returns the land that once belonged to Snow Country, including the Wang family of Beihai. My army can stop attacking when it arrives in Reki City." Li Huaqing said with some confusion, "The Arctic Ocean Command withdraws from Eastern Europe, helps you win all the interests in Eastern Europe, and returns the land, including the Wang family of Beihai. Returns?" He laughed. "President Jia Delan, are you kidding?" Jia Delan laughed in a low voice. "Those who know me well know that I never joke. I don't mean that." Li Huaqing shook his head. "I mean, why do you dare to make such a condition? Since when does Snow Country deserve to make conditions with Zhongzhou State? With just your 2 legions? What a joke. With my 2 legions?" Jia Delan grinned grimly. "My 2 legions are enough to crush the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou State today." He glanced at the screen and said coldly, "Li Huaqing, there are still 60 kilometers left. Wait for me. Soon, we will meet." Li Huaqing laughed, stood up, and said, "Bring it on." Before Jia Delan could speak, a sudden chaos suddenly came over. A large number of legions began to be in turmoil, and there was an uproar. Amidst the buzzing sound, everyone seemed to be shouting something in disbelief. Because everyone was talking, no one could hear the specific content. Jia Delan's face changed. He turned off the video and walked out of the carriage. The outside world was already in chaos. The soldiers who were temporarily reorganizing here were running chaotically in every corner, and everyone was passing on a message. Vaguely, the bad news finally reached Jia Delan's ears. Jia Delan's brain buzzed and became blank in an instant. In the afternoon of August 24th in Eastern Europe, on the battlefield of Mormons, the Arctic Army and the Bear Army, which had always been known as the pride of Snow Country, they were all wiped out. Chapter 596. At that moment, it was like entering the cold winter from the sunny early spring. The coldness of the whole world rushed over with ferocious malice. Chaos began to spread without warning. A lot of news, countless analyses, and sophisticated plans were completely disrupted at the same time. Jia Delin's brain was buzzing, and the spreading chill attacked his body. His body swayed, and he struggled to hold on to the carriage. More and more figures kept running in front of him. They shouted and screamed with panic on their faces. This was also Jia Delin's mood at the moment. Only the soldiers of Snow Country knew what Polar Bear meant to Snow Country. Arctic. Polar Bear. These were the two armies that had always been at the top since the founding of Snow Country. It could also be said that Snow Country had built these two armies at all costs for many years. Joining these two armies could be said to be the highest honor for all the soldiers of Snow Country. Countless military expenses, the top high-tech equipment, the treatment of ordinary soldiers comparable to that of middle-level officers, and even some special privileges, each of which showed the special nature of these two armies. Almost sparing no effort in training also meant that every soldier of Polar Bear could be said to be a walking arsenal. They were armed to the teeth with real guns and cutting-edge high-tech equipment all over their bodies. Under normal circumstances, even if a team of 5 polar bears were not familiar with each other, they could kill an ordinary reinforced company in just a few minutes with simple cooperation. This was Polar Bear, the strongest elite of Snow Country. To some extent, Snow Country's unstinting propaganda and support for Polar Bear had made all the soldiers of Snow Country believe in their invincible terror and strength. Polar Bear was invincible in the world. This was the belief that the military of Snow Country had always believed in. Many years ago, when Dongqing Wudi first marched into Snow Country, although the Black Dragon Army also defeated the joint forces of the Arctic Army and the Bear Army, and even made them lose their flag in the process of escape, the Black Dragon Army itself also suffered heavy losses. In addition, Snow Country deliberately led all the soldiers to think that it was a strategic retreat and transfer of the military of Snow Country, so the belief of the military of Snow Country was not shaken. After that, it was the top officials of Snow Country who were nervous for a period of time. They tried their best to publicize the strength and sharpness of Polar Bear, so that the army of Snow Country was more convinced. Once the belief was accumulated to a certain extent, it would become a belief. It was different from Zhongzhou State. Everyone in Zhongzhou State also knew that the Border Control Corps was the most powerful army in Zhongzhou State, but it was too large. The major groups in Zhongzhou State also had doubts about Dongqing Wudi. In the past many years, although the Border Control Corps had a high reputation, it had not reached the level of Polar Bear. Moreover, everyone knew that no matter how powerful the Border Control Corps was, there was still the Beihai Corps in Zhongzhou State that was not inferior to the Border Control Corps. In addition, Gu Xingyun had replaced the Li family over the years, and Kunlun City was constantly developing. Therefore, although there were constant internal struggles in Zhongzhou State, it had always maintained vitality. In Snow Country, all the troops only had polar bears in their eyes. Many people didn't even know that the Polar Bear Army was actually divided into 2 armies. The polar bear became the religion of the army of Snow Country. It seemed that no one had ever thought that there would be a day when their belief collapsed, and to what extent the morale of the entire Snow Empire would collapse. Jia Delin held on tightly to the handle of the carriage. The chaotic shouts from the outside world kept coming in, and the first thing that came to his mind was how the Polar Bear Army had been completely annihilated. What was Tyrant doing? What was the Polar Ground Alliance doing? Jia Delin's heart was suddenly filled with anger. A lot of gunfire suddenly came from the temporarily reorganized army in front of him. Countless artillery fire rang out around Jia Delin. The earth was shaking, and screams and roars of disbelief rang out at the same time. Jia Delin stared blankly at this scene. His brain couldn't react at all, and he looked a little confused for a moment. The sudden outbreak of fighting spread to the entire army in an instant. The march of Snow Country was extremely powerful and rude. Wherever the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps passed, there was silence. At this time, the 2 armies were in the wilderness and had not been attacked at all. Then everything in front of them, internal strife? Jia Delan's eyes suddenly went black, and he roared angrily, "What's going on?" No one answered his question at all. The fighting broke out completely in a short period of chaos. The 7th Corps, the 14th Corps, every division, every regiment, and every company, in the densely packed camp, almost everyone held a gun and fired at the opposite side at the same time. A soldier of Snow Country looked blankly at his companions who were fighting. He was still hesitating, and the bullet next to him had directly penetrated his chest. Sharp pain spread through his whole body, and he fell down in a daze. The last scene in front of him was that a companion who he was not familiar with was pointing a gun at him, and his eyes were full of suspicion and suspicion. What's going on? The sound of gunfire rang out continuously. Indistinctly, chaotic roars sounded from everywhere, and instantly turned into a wave. Hugh has betrayed the country. Traitor, he leaked the information about the polar bear. Kill Jia Delan. Kill Hamilton. The chaotic roars impacted Jia Delan's will. Jia Delan's face was pale. Hugh Albert Milos. This name was not one of the 8 great marshals of the Snow Empire, but he was once the chief marshal of the Snow Empire, and now the chief of the Snow Empire. In terms of power and influence, he could definitely be counted as one of the top 5 figures of the Snow Empire. In the decisive battle in Mormons, Snow Country was led by the new chief marshal Tyrant, and the mastermind behind the scenes was Chief Hugh. He was a veteran of Snow Country's army, and his students were all over the world. General Delan, the 2nd commander of the 7th Corps, and General Hamilton, the commander of the 14th Corps, were both students of Chief Hugh, especially the latter, who was the son-in-law of Chief Hugh. Jia Delan shook his head violently. The situation was too sudden, and it was completely overturned in an instant. Before he had time to figure out what was going on, the fighting was already out of control. Until now, he did not even know whether Chief Hugh had committed treason. No, he did not even know how the news of Chief Hugh's treason spread. What kind of battle report would directly reach the ears of ordinary soldiers in the Corps without going through him? Jia Delan was suddenly shocked, and turned to pick up his phone and began to dial. But as soon as he opened the screen, his fingers became stiff. Unbeknownst to him, there was already no signal on the lit-up screen. The fighting continued, and no one could tell what was going on. As soon as the news of the annihilation of the polar bear army spread, the morale of the 2 corps had completely collapsed. No one knew who was the first to shout out the news of Hugh's treason. Because of the collapse of faith, the soldiers who were eager to find support for themselves naturally began to speculate countless facts that matched their imagination. The speculations of dozens of people began to spread, and in the blink of an eye, a large number of soldiers had already believed that the destruction of the polar bear army was due to Chief Hugh's treason. The commander of the 14th Corps, Hamilton, pulled out his gun in anger and killed a soldier who had provoked the morale of the army. This shot was like a fuse, and all the uneasiness, fear, doubt, and distrust completely exploded. Before Hamilton could put down his gun, countless bullets had already drowned him. Hamilton's personal guards began to fight back, and the fighting was a mess. The nearby panicked soldiers of Snow Country subconsciously joined in. Instinctively, they did not even know who they had hit, but in the eyes of those who were observant, countless people could distinguish between friend and foe. Thus, the chaotic fighting finally had some order. The rumors spread like a plague. The higher-ups of the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps had followed Chief Hugh to commit treason. The personal guards and confidants of the higher-ups clashed with a large number of soldiers. In the end, the 2 corps could no longer believe whether their comrades around them were on their side or traitors. So the fighting became completely chaotic. The 2 corps, which had been about to march into Reki City, saw blood, and a large number of people fell. People were making noise everywhere on the battlefield, as if they were shouting at the top of their lungs. At this moment, Hamilton was already dead. As Hugh's student, Doring had already subconsciously believed that his teacher had committed treason. He mobilized all of his trusted subordinates and treated the scene before him as a real war. Amidst the roar of cannon fire, the situation escalated in an instant, and the clamor and shouts from every corner of the battlefield finally became clearer. Countless voices converged into one content. Protect the president. In an instant, the two sides of the fighting rushed in Jia Delan's direction at the same time. Gunshots and gunfire, screams and wails. Corpses full of blood and minced flesh fell to the ground, bringing with them endless chaos and cruelty. The war spread directly to Jia Delan. Jia Delan, who was gathering technicians to decode the signal shielding, began to move under the protection of several palace warriors. Soldiers rushed over from all directions, shouting to protect the president. But in such a situation, the elite palace warriors were no longer willing to trust anyone. So in the face of their own country's army, they did not hesitate to start attacking. Lightning and raging fire began to light up. The scene became more and more chaotic. In the despair and anxiety of the end of the world, the technicians finally recovered the new number of the mobile phone. Jia Delan, who was disheartened, immediately dialed Hugh's number. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. Chief Hugh's tone was as usual. "Mr. President, has Reki City been breached?" Jia Delan froze for a moment, and his heart instantly sank to the bottom. With just one sentence, he had already confirmed a fact. Hugh did not commit treason. When the news that the Polar Bear army had been wiped out affected the morale of the army, everything that happened next was a plot that had been secretly planned for a long time. Jia Delan held the phone. At that moment, it was extremely difficult for him to breathe. He planned to use 2 legions to crush the defense of Wulan state. 2 legions, nearly 70,000 people, which was more than enough. But the other side had reached into the military of Snow Country. In the chaos, the morale of the army collapsed, and the camp was in turmoil. After this battle, how many people were left of the 70,000? Even if there were a lot left, how many were willing to obey his orders? 1,000? Or 10,000? In the hail of bullets. Jia Delan suddenly raised his mobile phone and roared, "Listen to me, I'm Boss Jia Delan." Countless bullets and gunfire flew directly over, drowning out his voice. Beside him, several experts of the thunder-shocking realm rushed over to block the bullets. Several other palace warriors pulled Jia Delan and continued to move. In the panic, it seemed that countless people were touching his body, almost lifting him up. Jia Delan was burning with anxiety. Countless sweat poured out of his body, and he shouted at the top of his voice. The sun fell and shone on the countless blood and bones in the wilderness. The unprecedented high temperature made Jia Delan's lips dry and cracked. He felt that his body was getting hotter and hotter, as if it was burning every nerve in his body. Finally, his body staggered and fell directly to the ground. "Wait," he said with difficulty, and his breathing seemed to be on fire. "Wait a minute, he had not finished speaking. "President. Mr. President. My God, why?" In countless exclamations of extreme horror, Jia Delan lowered his head in astonishment. At some point, his body really began to catch fire. Thin flames seeped out from every pore of his body, lightly lingering around the surface of his body. An unimaginable heat engulfed his entire body, bringing with it incomparable pain. Jia Delan opened his eyes and opened his mouth. The next second, countless flames came out of his eyes, mouth, ears, and all over his body. He seemed to struggle to get up. In just a moment, the fire rose, and President Jia Delan's body, which was about to get up, suddenly turned into ashes. The ashes were flying in the wind. Jia Delan had disappeared. The president of Snow Country, who had personally led the expedition, could no longer reach Reki City. And with the direction of the wind, the ashes of his body seemed to float there. The saint warrior looked in the direction where Jia Delan had disappeared with a dull face. After a long time, a voice with a sobbing tone suddenly sounded. The president was killed. The whole battlefield was silent for a moment. On the low mountain thousands of meters away, in the world of the telescope, the whole battlefield began to distort little by little after the extreme silence. A clamor of voices rose from afar, and an even more tragic battle broke out. The telescope kept hesitating. Countless soldiers were completely swept away in confusion and anger. In their sight, on the large battlefield, the number of people was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye almost every moment. The flowing blood was like a river, dyeing the whole wilderness red. The man in the military uniform of Snow Country put down the telescope, shrugged, and said, "Jia Delan is dead." His tone was nonchalant. However, this news was enough to shock the whole world. August 24th. The president of Snow Country was assassinated in the process of personally leading the expedition to Reki City. From this moment on, the giant hand, which had been hidden behind the scenes, finally moved slowly. There was a man sitting next to the man. He quickly sent the news of Jia Delan's death and said without raising his head, "Do you want to put Rex into the observation area?" There was a notebook in front of him. Countless windows were flashing on the notebook, and one of the windows was already filled with densely packed names. Those were the spies that had been used before or had already been sacrificed. After this battle, even more people would enter the observation area. He clicked on another window. There were very few names in the window, which meant that there were fewer and fewer pawns that they could use. No. The man in the military uniform laughed. From now on, Rex will enter the implementation area. I think he will not be observed for a long time. He took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The moment the phone was connected, he bent down slightly and said respectfully, "Fortunately, I didn't fail you. The mission has been successfully completed." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, and then a calm male voice sounded. "You've worked hard. Get ready to retreat." Rex, the man in the military uniform, held the binoculars and hesitated slightly. "That's not what we should care about. Jia Delan is dead. From today on, we just need to see how he performs in Snow Country." The man in the military uniform was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "Got it." He put down the phone, tidied up his military uniform, and said to his companions, "Retreat." The army passed through. The sun had set in the broken city. The dim light shone on the temporary base of the Black Dragon army. In the atmosphere of iron and blood, the garrison was full of fatigue but extremely sharp anger. The governor's mansion had been completely destroyed. Sitting in the completely destroyed ruins, Dongqing Wudi looked down at the city under his feet and remained silent. There was a battle report at his feet. At this time, the news that Jia Delan, the president of Snow Country, was assassinated had spread throughout the Dark World. The battle between the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps had stopped not long ago. The crazy crowd completely lost their minds under the stimulation of Jia Delan's death. The 2 Corps, which had nearly 70,000 people, ended up with less than 20,000 people. The survivors had almost no fighting spirit. However, Ross State and Oga State sent less than 15,000 troops, and it only took them half an hour to disperse the survivors of the 2 Corps. After this battle, it was certain that Snow Country would abolish the establishment of the 7th and the 14th Corps forever. Of course, the premise was that Snow Country could continue to exist. But now it seemed that whether Snow Country could continue to exist depended largely on the will of Dongqing Wudi. Lieutenant General Wang Qianzhong, the commander of the Black Dragon Army, stood beside Dongqing Wudi and reported the battle damage. "That's about it. Now we have nearly 50,000 people who can fight. If the minister agrees, the Black Dragon Army still has 30,000 available troops, which can arrive as soon as possible. In addition, Marshal Jiang has transferred troops from several other corps of the Border Control Corps. In 3 days, more than 100,000 people from the Pegasus Corps and the Wild Sand Corps will enter Snow Country from Liaodong. Within a week, this number can increase to 200,000. In half a month. Forget it." Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. "Send an order for all the follow-up troops of the Pegasus Corps and the Wild Sand Corps to retreat. Qianzhong, you have to work hard to count the wounded and victims of the Black Dragon Army. The compensation must be in place as soon as possible. You have to keep an eye on this matter personally. No accidents are allowed." Wang Qianzhong hesitated and said subconsciously, "But Marshal Jiang has, what?" Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows. With a faint smile, he said, Marshal Jiang is far away in the south. Do you still want to order me? I'm still here. Do you think my judgment of the situation is not as good as that little guy's? Wang Qianzhong's face changed, and he shook his head with a bitter smile. Minister, you know that's not what I mean. He had always called Dongqing Wudi minister, and the boundary was extremely clear. And the Marshal Jiang he called was naturally Jiang Hongwei, the new commander of the Border Control Corps codenamed Dijiang. Wang Qianzhong was the former commander of the Arctic Ocean Command and one of the corps generals of the Wang family of Beihai. After he exchanged posts with Cheng Huaining, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, his experience in the Black Dragon Army was even more embarrassing than Cheng Huaining's. This embarrassment was vividly reflected in Dongqing Wudi's personal expedition to Snow Country. The moment Dongqing Wudi appeared in the Black Dragon Army, the whole Black Dragon Army seemed to have a soul. It was an unparalleled fanaticism. They broke through the Divine Shield Corps and charged all the way. In countless battles, Wang Qianzhong didn't even give any decent orders. He stood beside Dongqing Wudi and was completely a messenger. And it was foreseeable that as long as the battle continued, he would continue like this. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him, waved his hand, and said, You still don't understand. Jia Delan was assassinated. No matter what happens to Snow Country in the future, at least in the chaos, Snow Country is destined to exit miserably. This also means that the war has come to an end. What do we want to do by mobilizing the army at this time? To completely conquer Snow Country? If that's the case, other countries won't agree. He looked into the distance, at Kamos, which was 200 miles away. Vaguely, he could almost feel the panic in that city. If we want to deter Snow Country, these people are enough. At least for now, we don't need to do meaningless things. Wang Qianzhong was silent for a while, then nodded and said, I see. Go and inform the logistics department to make some delicious food, but don't relax. Alcohol is forbidden. You can choose whatever ingredients you want. If you don't have enough, where can you find them in such a big city? Just go and get them. Also, the compensation I mentioned just now must be treated as a top priority. Come over later and visit the injured with me. Dongqing Wudi looked at the sky. The setting sun was like blood. He shook his head and said, Take a rest tonight. There's no need to worry about defeating Kamos. Wang Qianzhong gritted his teeth, nodded, and turned to leave. Not long after he left, Tang Guizheng, the vice commander of the Black Dragon Army, came over and called him marshal with a smile. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and didn't bother to pay attention to him. He didn't care about being rude to his own people. Tang Guizheng was burly and rough in managing the army, but he had always been disciplined. Among the generals and even the colonels of the Border Control Corps, his education was not high, but he fought bravely and paid great attention to military law. His strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was enough to convince the masses. Therefore, his army had always been the one that violated the least rules in the whole Zhongzhou state. He was Dongqing Wudi's confidant when he first entered the Border Control Corps. Although he was no longer young and was close to 40 years old, in Dongqing Wudi's eyes, he was always a child. Tang Guizheng didn't mind Dongqing Wudi's attitude at all. He smiled and approached Dongqing Wudi. He took out a crumpled cigarette and handed it to Dongqing Wudi. He took out a lighter and smiled politely. Marshal, would you like a cigarette? Dongqing Wudi took the cigarette and lit it. He took a puff and said, Let's make it clear first. If you have something to say, just say it. But if you want to bring up the past again, you don't have to say it. Tang Guizheng's face turned red. He looked at Dongqing Wudi with hidden bitterness. What a jerk. Dongqing Wudi laughed and scolded, What? Do you dislike Wang Qianzhong so much? It's the overall will of Zhongzhou state that he comes to the Black Dragon Army. Oh, you want to leave because you can't change it? And you want to be a guard by my side? Damn it, after this fight, you'll have 2 golden stars on your shoulders. When have you ever seen a guard at the level of Lieutenant General? In your mind, is being a high-ranking officer in the army not as good as running errands by my side? That's certainly not as good. Tang Guizheng opened his mouth and laughed. His eyes were extremely sincere. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. Like I said, it's impossible. Even if Zhongzhou State agrees, I won't. Talent is not used like this. In fact, it was very easy to transfer Tang Guizheng away. As long as he communicated with the Wang family of Beihai, who was eager to open up the situation in the Border Control Corps, would definitely send Tang Guizheng off with both hands. With him in the Black Dragon Army, he, the vice commander, was more majestic than the real commander, Wang Qianzhong. If he could be sent away, as long as the Southeast Group was not a fool, how could they refuse? But it was impossible for Dongqing Wudi to give up the Border Control Corps. As long as Tang Guizheng was still in the Black Dragon Army, no matter who the commander of the Black Dragon Army changed, Dongqing Wudi's right to speak would not be affected in a short time. Tang Guizheng grinned and said, Marshal, you also think I'm a talent, don't you? I heard that in this chaos, the performance of the Arctic Ocean Command is extremely poor. Boss Cheng just took office not long ago, so it shouldn't affect him much. Wang Qianzhong will probably suffer a lot. To sum up the reason, the Arctic Ocean Command's performance is so poor because there aren't many people around Boss Cheng. Marshal, you know how well I work with old Cheng. I'm just wondering if I can go to the Arctic Ocean Command and get a position as the Deputy Commander or Chief of Staff. If I can't win, I don't want the merit this time. Just get me somewhere else. Dongqing Wudi looked at him, expressionless. Tang Guizheng's smile gradually disappeared, and he settled for the next best thing. He chuckled and said, if it doesn't work, let me go to Tiannan and stay with His Little Highness. That bastardly Zhonghu is so arrogant around His Little Highness. If I go there, what will happen to him? Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes. Marshal, Tang Guizheng's expression became serious. I've thought about it carefully. After this time, you must take advantage of the situation in the military. I wonder if there is a place for me. This is a little big, and I have to consider all aspects. I can't answer you now. Dongqing Wudi had a headache. Let's wait and see. Even if you want to leave, you have to arrange a successor. There are more than 100,000 good men in the Black Dragon Army. If you leave, it will be your responsibility if anything goes wrong in the future. Do you know that? Yes. Tang Guizheng laughed and took out a cigarette again. Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. Get out of here. His cell phone rang. Dongqing Wudi took out his cell phone and glanced at it. His eyes softened slightly. He answered the phone and said, Hello. Are you busy? On the phone, Bai Qingqian's voice sounded soft and elegant. I'm fine. Dongqing Wudi smiled and looked at the setting sun that was no longer dazzling. I've just taken down Norav City. I can have a good rest tonight. If there are no accidents, the negotiation with Snow Country should arrive tomorrow at the latest. Bai Qingqian hesitated slightly. Jia Delin's death, is it related to Samsara Palace? I don't know. Dongqing Wudi softly interrupted his wife's words. It's too sensitive to investigate the truth of this kind of thing. Anyway, the facts are right now. As soon as Jia Delin died, Snow Country was destined to exit from the chaos. This time they suffered heavy losses and were in internal chaos. I guess they didn't have the mood to investigate other things. Bai Qingqian agreed. This is an opportunity. Some time ago, our family was under a lot of pressure. Now with this incident, we can relieve it. The Southeast Group is too aggressive. I'll deal with these things. Don't act rashly. Dongqing Wudi's voice was very light, but it was unquestionable. The noble and elegant Madame Dongqing and the border governor's secretary Bai were the same person, but most of the time they were not the same person. Bai Qingqian, who seemed to be gentle and calm, was extremely decisive and fierce in dealing with things. In many cases, she was even vicious to her enemies. Whether in Qinzhou or now in Liaodong, although Bai Qingxian was a woman, she was an iron-fisted person who was both respected and feared. Some time ago, because of Dongqing Wudi's transfer of troops, the whole giant group was under unprecedented pressure. In a short time, 3 of Dongqing Wudi's old subordinates had been defeated. If this matter was handled well, it would be enough to quell the aftermath of the transfer of troops. Dongqing Wudi was afraid that his wife was not reconciled and wanted to get something back. Internal strife was different from external warfare. Many things could not be rushed. I understand. Bai Qingxian smiled. I'm in Liaodong now. I called you to ask our marshal what support he needs. I promised to make a backup plan. Dongqing Wudi laughed and said seriously, "Thank you, Secretary Bai." The flames of war burned. After the smoke of gunpowder. The husband and wife, who had a frozen relationship, finally gradually got along and became intimate again. Bai Qingxian was silent for a while and said softly, "You still have to pay attention to your side. This time, when you march into snow country, there will be no gossip at home, only praise for your merits. But the international voice is not good. At that time, it is inevitable that some people will say that you are cruel and inhuman. You know, I don't care about that." Dongqing Wudi said lightly. He thought for a moment and continued, "No, I still care. I care about those international comments, but I don't expect them to praise me. I just think they are not cruel enough. I am indeed cruel, but so what? They can say that I am a beast, a butcher, and an executioner. It doesn't matter. The more they say, the happier I am. Because when these comments fall into the ears of the enemy, they can clearly realize what kind of person Dongqing Wudi is. I just chatted with President Hua Cheng, and he said that we are all people who have no way out. I agree with this. In fact, not only us, but anyone who has a concern behind us has no way out. In life, when we carry something, we are destined to move forward. I have you, the Dongqing clan, and hundreds of thousands of troops behind me, so I have no way out. I am the god of massacre. Naturally, I have to kill. I have to kill more people. The worse my international reputation is, the more they will be afraid of me. In this way, the people behind me and my family will be safer." Dongqing Wudi said quietly. His voice was warm, but his eyes were extremely cold. "Qingxian, believe it or not, if I fall in snow country this time, our father and children, you and me, and all the people in the Dongqing clan will die miserably. At that time, none of us will have a good end." He paused and laughed. "So I can't fall, and I will never fall. When Tianlan really grows up, I can take over my burden. I will always stand here. As long as I am here, the Dongqing clan and the Bai clan will be there." Bai Qingxian sighed softly, a little absent-minded. Perhaps everyone who reached a high position had this kind of fear deep in their hearts. With fear and concern, they could no longer retreat or compromise. "You have an early rest. I'll hang up first. If there is no accident, I will go back with Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi laughed. Bai Qingxian nodded. Hearing that Dongqing Wudi was as silent as ever, she took the initiative to hang up the phone. The setting sun outside the city finally went down. Night fell. Dongqing Wudi put away his mobile phone and slowly stood up. On the evening of August 24th. The news that President Jia Delan of Snow Country was assassinated spread to all corners of the world in the fastest time and made the headlines of various countries. Li Huacheng and the patriarchs of the wealthy families in Reki City looked at the news in astonishment. After repeated confirmations, the whole Reki City instantly became a sea of revelry. At the same time, countless countries in the camp of Snow Country began to call back the troops they had sent to Mormons, and at the same time, they sent envoys with enough weight to Reki City to see Li Huacheng. On this night, the Black Dragon Legion of less than 50,000 people stationed in a city 200 miles away from Kamas. On this night, after the chaotic high-level meeting of Snow Country, which had no leader, and facing Dongqing Wudi's increasingly quiet army, everyone finally made the most difficult decision. Snow Country officially gave up Mormons. All the legions that went to Mormons withdrew and reconsolidated their defensive areas. The Foreign Affairs Minister of Snow Country left Kamos in person and paid a visit to Dongqing Wudi. The general trend over Eastern Europe was still roaring. On this night, after Rothschild, the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, the Men in Black, the Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, the Vatican, Violet, Morton, and other major forces left one after another, Snow Country, one of the world's superpowers, finally admitted defeat and left with a heavy price in the chaos. The end was in sight. The border of Eisen Federation was completely desolate. When the battle in Mormons was at its most stalemate, Eisen Federation almost sent out most of its troops. The Federation, which was empty inside, was crushed by Li Tianlan again. Now the whole country was almost in a state of defenselessness. It was cold and quiet, looking extremely miserable. The fluttering white robe quietly crossed the border of the Eisen Federation and continued moving forward. The red dagger hung on the hem of her white dress, swaying gently as she walked, flashing with red arcs of light. When she was about to enter Snow Country, Li Shi took out a positioning device. On the small screen, a red light spot was flashing gently. Li Shi operated it casually and planned a clear route. Then she moved faster than before. That place was the gathering place of all the forces of Kunlun City in Eastern Europe. In the 20 years since the rise of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City, which had no background, wholeheartedly consolidated its position in Zhongzhou State. In the extremely important Eastern Europe, it did not even leave a base. Among all the major forces, Kunlun City might be the only one that had to rely on positioning devices to gather in the wilderness. The scattered team of only a few hundred people set up a small camp in the wilderness. When Li Shi responded to the reconnaissance signal and came over, an extremely ugly man with a broken arm led everyone to greet her. "Madam, I'm Bloody Hand." The old man with a broken arm bowed slightly and said in a respectful tone. He was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, close to the half-step invincible realm. Before Li Shi officially arrived at the theater of operations, he was the commander-in-chief here. Li Shi glanced at him indifferently, and there was no expression on her delicate and beautiful face. The wind blew over. In the increasingly awkward atmosphere, she suddenly said, "Is everyone here?" "Yes." Bloody Hand also seemed a little embarrassed. "Madam, although there are few people here, I can guarantee that they are all elites of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan can lead hundreds of people to defeat the 6 groups of Snow Country, and we also, you?" Li Shi glanced at him. "Do you think you deserve to compare with Li Tianlan? Not to mention others, can you stop Li Tianlan's sword now?" Bloody Hand's face turned red, but he did not dare to say anything. Li Shi glanced at the crowd in front of her, shook her head, and said softly, "It's really shabby." Bloody Hand gave a wry smile and did not know what to say. After all, Kunlun City's rise was too short, and it did not pay enough attention to the outside of Zhongzhou State. Judging from the performance of the chaos in Eastern Europe, any second-rate force in the dark world that had developed for a long time seemed to be much calmer than Kunlun City. Hundreds of people met in the wilderness. Thinking about it carefully, it could be said as a joke. "Madam, although Kunlun City has no foundation in the outside world now, after this victory," Bloody Hand braced himself to say, and then his words were directly interrupted by Li Shi. "No," Li Shi suddenly said. Bloody Hand looked up in amazement. In his sight, Li Shi's eyes were clear and bright, crystal clear, like the stars in the night sky. Bloody Hand blinked. "What?" "I mean, Kunlun City will not win in Eastern Europe." He thought of today's intelligence. Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, vomited blood and fainted on the spot when he presided over the internal meeting of Kunlun City. After suppressing the injury for so long, it finally reached the time when it could not be suppressed. Li Shi's eyes were a little dazed, with inexplicable emotions. Bloody Hand suddenly realized that something was wrong, and his body subconsciously took a step back. Li Shi's eyes had completely locked on Bloody Hand. "I still remember you," she said softly. Bloody Hand forced a smile and subconsciously looked at his arm. Do you still remember me? Li Shi's voice was very gentle. Bloody Hand's face gradually became pale. It's been so many years, Li Shi said softly, as if she was lost in memory. In fact, your lineup could not kill him. Even if summer solstice destroyed the infinite sky, you could not kill him. She was silent for a while. Bloody Hand, do you remember what you did back then? You kidnapped an old man and used him to coerce a pregnant woman. Li Shi smiled softly. You poisoned the pregnant woman and wanted to poison the child in her belly. Bloody Hand's eyes were a little desperate. Of course, he remembered those things. The pregnant woman at that time was not someone else, but Li Shi in front of him. You said it was easy to save the lives of the old man and the child. You told the pregnant woman that you only needed one sword. Then that silly woman. Li Shi's tone was absent-minded, and tears flowed down from her eyes. After many years, this seemed to be the first time she shed tears. Her numb heart was shaking and gradually broke through the dusty ice. That silly woman really took out a sword at the most critical time and aimed it at the man she loved most. Her voice was shaking. But what you don't know is that many years later, when the pregnant woman saw the man she had killed once again, all the feelings she had for him were gone, not even a little bit. She could only see disgust and hatred in his eyes. She smiled. It was only then that she understood. The reason why he didn't fight back when the sword pierced his heart was not because he loved her. Perhaps he did, but when the sword flashed, all his feelings were gone. The reason why he didn't fight back was to protect the child in the woman's belly. Bloody Hand's body began to tremble. Li Shi cried out. He was also a fool, because neither he nor the pregnant woman at that time thought that after everything was over, the person who kidnapped her father and wanted to poison her child did not keep his promise. The child was born, but he directly fell to death. Bloody Hand suddenly knelt down, and his body trembled. Madam, this is the order of the governor. I know. Li Shi looked down at him and blinked her eyes. In the tears, the depths of her eyes were full of ice and snow. But now your governor is seriously injured and unconscious. Who can protect you? Bloody Hand raised his head in amazement. In his sight, the beautiful face was full of memories. I don't know what I want to do, but I think since he can't protect you, he can't control me. For so many years. I want to be myself for once. Madam, Bloody Hand's voice trembled. Li Shi's body gradually rose. The sword light lingered in the field. My name is Li Shi, he said. A sharp and bright sword light suddenly shone in the vast and empty night. The sword light twisted and split in the air, and countless sword energy surged in an instant. Silently, it tore into countless sword lights and spread to the crowd. Bloody Hand's face was full of horror. He still wanted to say something, but the sword light had already shrouded him. His body was torn into countless pieces by the sword light in an instant. The pain spread. At the moment when his consciousness was about to disappear, he seemed to hear Li Shi's voice. But what you don't know is that it was not my child who fell to death that year. The eternal darkness swallowed everything. Under the sword, hundreds of elites left by Kunlun City in Eastern Europe turned into minced meat in an instant. Li Shi fell to the ground, and her white clothes fluttered. At this moment, she was herself. Her eyes looked in the direction of Mormons, thinking about everything in the past. The end had begun. Li Shi took a step forward and whispered to herself, I'm coming. Chapter 597. The flames of war spread from Mormons. Up to now, the area dozens of miles around Mormons had been full of battlefields and the army of snow country. Nearly 400,000 troops rushed to Mormons in an endless stream. The mountains and plains were covered with soldiers preparing for war. In a large-scale war, the extremely cruel fact for any expert had been clearly displayed. So what if he was in the invincible realm, even if he was at the peak of the invincible realm? Even if he was the chosen one, how many could the sword of the chosen one kill when 400,000 troops came all over the mountains and plains? Li Tianlan didn't remember how many people he had killed. He had even forgotten how long he had been fighting. Entering Snow Country and approaching Mormons was the beginning of entering hell. The vast army rushed to Mormons. Their lone army was also rushing to Mormons. Hundreds of thousands of troops were scattered in every corner around Mormons. Li Tianlan couldn't hide at all. They first put on the military uniforms of Snow Country and mixed into the crowd. They were completely exposed when they moved less than 20 miles forward. The battle broke out almost without any hesitation. A large number of troops rushed to Mormons, and the whole legion turned around and charged at Li Tianlan and the others at the same time. It was a confrontation between dozens of people and tens of thousands of people. In the splashing blood, Li Tianlan was at the forefront, trying to penetrate the iron wall of soldiers in front of him. Blood flowed out in the wilderness. As soon as the formation of the First Legion became scattered, the Second Legion had rushed up again. Frenzied, angry, and desperate roars and the sound of gunfire echoed in his ears. In order to save physical strength, Li Tianlan had given up using a sword most of the time. The endless army around him meant an endless supply of weapons and ammunition. The people around him were getting fewer and fewer. The last dozens of people surrounded him and kept rushing forward. Dense soldiers rushed up with red eyes, and Li Tianlan's speed was getting slower and slower. Great fatigue kept eroding his will. The idea that he couldn't get out kept emerging from his heart, but he suppressed it. Li Tianlan didn't feel anything when he set off from Reki City, defeated the 6 legions, ran for thousands of miles, and killed the 6 marshals of Snow Country. The moles of Samsara Palace lurking in the legions of Snow Country always made the most ingenious response at the most appropriate time. At that time, although Li Tianlan felt the pressure, it was far from unbearable. In many cases, with the cooperation of countless moles, he could be considered to be at ease. Only now did he truly feel the effects of war. Not only him, but everyone, including General Yi of the 9th Heaven of Zhongzhou State, participated in such a large-scale war for the first time. Endless waves of soldiers pounced forward. The sound of gunshots rang out incessantly, and blood splattered everywhere. Layers and layers of corpses piled up on the ground. It was as if there was no end to the number of soldiers that could never be completely killed. They were like an endless wave of frenzied wolves. Being in the midst of them, one would feel an almost suffocating pressure at every moment. The soldiers behind him surrounded him again. There was still no end to the soldiers in front of him. His heart was beating wildly. Li Tianlan, who was gasping for breath, held the machine gun and kept shooting. The muzzle spat out tongues of fire, and the bullets were thrown out like long whips. There was no need to aim. The bullets would hit the target at every moment. Someone fell down and was trampled into meat paste. Behind him, there were still many ferocious and angry faces. They rushed up and fell down. Countless people and countless faces seemed to become exactly the same. Li Tianlan felt dizzy. He couldn't get out. When the thought echoed in his heart again, endless thunder had already burst out around him. The dazzling lightning turned into electric arcs one after another. Yi, whose palms were covered with blood and his fingers were so badly cut that even his bones could be seen, pulled the bowstring. The bowstring was tightening little by little. Blood flowed down from his fingers. Countless flashes of lightning converged on the stormy bowstring, turning into a dark blue arrow. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He shook his head and said, "I can't hold on any longer. Mormons is 30 miles ahead. At this time, there's no need to save your strength." His body tensed up and he loosened his fingers casually. Whoosh! In the extremely sharp sound, the blue arrow gathered in front of the bow left the bowstring. Bang! A dull explosion sounded almost at the same time. In front of Li Tianlan, a soldier who was about to pounce on him with a grenade was shot to pieces by an arrow. The dazzling arrow kept moving forward with a large area of electric arcs. The arrow flew in a straight line, and the sharp and bright electric arcs continued to spread around. The power of this arrow, which was enough to kill someone at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm or even an ordinary half-step invincible realm, was constantly dispersed. When it fell on ordinary soldiers, it was completely fatal. In the blink of an eye, the blue arrow kept shooting soldiers one after another. It had flown dozens of meters in the crowd. The electric arcs lingered, not only in a straight line, but also along the way. All the soldiers nearby lost their lives under the electric arcs. Perhaps some people survived, but there was no such thing as luck on the battlefield. The soldiers of Snow Country, who had completely gone mad, rushed over under the command of the officers at all costs. In a flash, they trampled the wounded who fell on the ground to pieces. In the real despair, the fierceness of the soldiers of Snow Country had been completely stimulated. In front of Li Tianlan, the faces of every soldier of Snow Country were full of fear of death, but also with hysterical ferocity. He shot the arrow and didn't even bother to look at the result. The rainstorm string, which was famous in the dark world, flashed with silver light. The whole bow began to stretch in his hand, and the silver light flickered slightly. The extremely old and heavy bow began to elongate, becoming slender, ferocious, and extremely dangerous in the silver light. He held the rainstorm string, which had completely changed, and pulled the bow. The blue electric arcs began to twine in his bloody hands again. "Young master, take a break. Let me do it." Li Wangxing rushed to Li Tianlan's side and said in a hoarse voice. His silver-gray robe was spotless in the chaos, and lines of faintly flashing lines were shining on the robe. This was his four spirits armor, Black Tortoise, codenamed Immortal. The Black Tortoise armor did not have the stealth of Azure Dragon or the extreme lethality of Vermilion Bird. It was known as Immortal, which represented absolute defense. When the lines on this silver-gray robe were all lit, it could even withstand the full attack of an invincible realm expert. When they left Reki City, Li Wangxing once wanted to give this robe to Li Tianlan. He didn't say much at that time, but Li Tianlan didn't take it. Along the way, Li Tianlan had been fighting in the front. When they were about to approach Mormons, Li Wangxing obviously had to go all out to cooperate with Yi. They led Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, Black Tortoise, and all the members of the Terracotta Army to completely break through the Snow Country Army in front of them. Li Tianlan shook his head. The surroundings were too chaotic, and he almost had no energy to speak loudly. The machine gun in his hand roared desperately and fired the last bullet. The silver light began to flash on his wrist. Falling stars, which had obviously been damaged because of the combination with Blue Sky Underworld in the Battle of the Date of Death, appeared in his hand. The cold light flowed on the blade. Li Tianlan said something. His voice was so soft that Li Wangxing couldn't hear it at all, but his meaning was extremely obvious. The sharp silver light swept through the crowd. Li Tianlan's speed suddenly accelerated. The sword energy rose into the sky, and the silver light continued to spread. Beside Li Tianlan, Lin Yuxian suddenly let out a long roar, and his figure closely followed Li Tianlan. 24 moves of sword. 24 moves of sword. The sword energy of the same origin began to converge in the charge side by side. The sharp sword light splashed wildly like a rainstorm. Dongxing Rushi followed the two of them, and almost all her pressure was borne by Li Tianlan. In this way, the genius woman of Jade Pool could be more focused on killing. Black Tortoise, Vermilion Bird, Azure Dragon. The three groups of Terracotta Army began to gather. At the beginning of the war, these super elites of the Terracotta Army were undoubtedly in the best state. They didn't feel tired, and they didn't even have much psychological pressure. For them, as long as they were not dead and could still move, they would always be in the peak state. Li Wangxing led the three groups of people forward crazily. The super elites of the three groups followed him. Artillery fire flashed, and the savage killing tore the crowd in front of them apart in an instant. Yi's body rose into the air. The strange blue arrows whistled in the sky. Every time the arrows penetrated and exploded, it meant that a large number of Snow Country's troops fell. As for the others, there was nothing else. That was all Li Tianlan had now. Less than 50 people. And the other elites who followed him had all fallen on the battlefield. Li Tianlan had reflected on it. For people who had never really experienced a large-scale and tragic war, they would never think of the grandeur and cruelty when the war broke out, so they would subconsciously overestimate their strength. In fact, this lone army of hundreds of people did play an unexpected role. The defeat of the 6 armies of Snow Country almost completely ruined Snow Country's plan to march into Reki City. Because of this, Snow Country mobilized all its troops and began to attack Mormons when no one faced that strange failure. At this moment, there were less than 50 people around Li Tianlan, but they gathered in the battlefield of hundreds of thousands of people. Not to mention that not all of these 50 people were top experts. Even if Li Tianlan entered the Invincible Realm, or even reached the peak of the Invincible Realm, these 50 people were all at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm or even a half-step Invincible Realm. In this vast battlefield, he couldn't do anything. Then what was the point of coming here? Li Tianlan thought about this question countless times, but he never had an answer. Perhaps the most sensible thing to do was to return to Reki City after he defeated the 6 armies of Snow Country. In this way, with him and the Terracotta Army in Reki City, at least there would be some power to defend against foreign enemies. After Snow Country's plan failed, Reki City was more stable. Li Tianlan did not deny the benefits of doing so. It was just that he couldn't do it. He didn't know the meaning of coming to Mormons at all costs. Maybe it was really meaningless. But he just wanted to come and see. The killing kept moving forward. Screams, roars, curses, and begs for mercy. The sound of blood splashing and bones breaking could be heard. The sound of gunshots and cannons. The world was chaotic. The chaotic sound completely occupied everything. At some point, more and more soldiers of Snow Country rushed over. There was more than one army. There were 2, 3, and 5. The densely packed army was like a vast and mighty ocean, and after an unknown period of time, it had turned into a tidal wave that seemed to be able to devour everything. But Li Tianlan suddenly felt relaxed. The faces of the soldiers of Snow Country flashed before his eyes. The anger on their faces had disappeared, replaced by surprise, confusion, helplessness, and panic. The fighting intent began to disappear from them. More and more troops rushed over. They rushed to Li Tianlan and other places. Li Tianlan rushed up against the tide. The people directly opposite him began to fight with him. But the people behind him deliberately bypassed Li Tianlan and continued to rush forward. Their direction was getting farther and farther away from Mormons. Li Tianlan stopped in a daze. The team defended where they were. In the rumbling footsteps, countless troops of Snow Country bypassed them and rushed over. Li Tianlan and Lin Yuxian looked at each other and asked subconsciously, "What happened?" It seems that something big has happened in Snow Country. At present, their army seems to be withdrawing from Mormons. Li Tianlan was shocked. Withdrawing from Mormons. Everyone knew what it meant. Not only Snow Country, but anyone who withdrew from Mormons at this time would admit their failure after paying a huge or even extremely heavy price. There was Snow Country. The mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, the death of the 8 marshals, and the tragic casualties were all enough to make the national power of Snow Country retreat for many years in an instant. At such a price, the party with the largest and strongest power actually wanted to withdraw? If Snow Country kept investing its troops in Mormons, it was likely to become the final winner. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. The Samsara Palace was very strong. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was very strong. But there were many people in Snow Country. Hundreds of thousands of people rushed forward one by one. Wang Tianzong would be exhausted. When the victory was in hand, why did Snow Country withdraw? Li Tianlan took a step forward and suddenly raised his head. The stars were shining in the vast night sky with starlight. An almost invisible and incorporeal sword intent spread toward them silently. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The next second, Lin Yuxian also seemed to feel something and looked up at the sky. Then it was Li Wangsheng. Then it was Yi, who was powerful but didn't know much about the 24 moves of sword. Then it was Dongqing Rushi. The vast sword intent spread over quietly. It was fierce, sharp, and shattered everything. This was the purest 24 moves of sword. The sword intent was vast and majestic. Some sword energy fell in front of Li Tianlan and froze the void. The tide-like army of Snow Country directly collided with the sword energy. Broken corpses and blood flew in an instant. The extremely fierce sword energy protected Li Tianlan and others, and then spread along the army of Snow Country. In the blink of an eye, it had spread dozens of meters away. The army of Snow Country rushed into the field covered by the sword energy in a panic, and then they were torn apart and fell down. Before Li Tianlan and others could react, the front of the sword energy was already full of corpses. The army of Snow Country finally realized something, but no one made any comments about it. The officers at the top did not give any orders, so a large number of troops directly bypassed the area after a slight pause and rushed forward. The night was slightly distorted. Li Tianlan stared at a certain point in the night sky. The figures of a man and two women suddenly and naturally appeared in the night sky. Li Tianlan had been looking in this direction, but he did not notice how they appeared. The three of them were like shadows condensed in the night sky, standing there silently. Then Lin Yuxian exclaimed, "Dad?" In the night sky, Lin Fengting stood at the forefront and looked at Lin Yuxian. He frowned and felt a little helpless. The master of Samsara Palace, who appeared at the same time as him, was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan looked at flaming fire. His pupils contracted slightly. He was a little confused and understood. The sword energy all over the sky was still lingering. It was the purest 24 moves of sword, and also the sword energy that really belonged to the invincible realm. The power of this sword energy, even if it was not at the peak of the invincible realm, was not far from it, and could steadily enter the divine list. The source of this sword energy did not belong to Lin Fengting or the master of Samsara Palace. It belonged to flaming fire. The invincible realm. And it was flaming fire who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan finally understood why Qin Weibai had never been worried about her safety. He also finally understood that among the 12 super masters, Qin Weibai was the only one who followed flaming fire, even though a female super master like Horsewoman ranked ahead of flaming fire. A bodyguard close to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's brain was a little confused. He felt a sense of familiarity in this sword intent. This familiarity was not the sword intent of the 24 moves of sword, but the sword energy that had firmly guarded him on the night of the fallen sun when he confronted Wang Tianzong and deity. At that time, he also wondered who this person was. Because that person was very strong, but it would not be the master of Samsara Palace, because the other party was obviously weaker than the master of Samsara Palace. Now, Li Tianlan finally understood. That night, it was flaming fire who watched him in the dark. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the cold and elegant face full of mature charm. His gaze was not covetous or anything else. In his extremely focused gaze, there was still doubt deep in his eyes. Lin Fengting and the master of Samsara Palace landed on the ground. Flaming fire stood quietly behind the master of Samsara Palace, maintaining her sword energy. Li Tianlan was still looking at her. He suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Flaming fire lowered her eyelids and said nothing. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became sharp. He recognized flaming fire's sword energy. Thinking of that night, he naturally had a doubt that had always been hidden in his heart. That night, when he confronted deity and felt flaming fire's sword energy, Li Tianlan clearly perceived his swordsmanship from it. That sword energy belonged to the 24 moves of sword. But the core sword intent was definitely Li Tianlan's own path. Flaming fire? He really didn't have much contact with flaming fire. In Li Tianlan's impression, every time he saw her, she didn't even give him a good look. "Who the hell are you?" Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. "I'm flaming fire." Flaming fire's tone was calm and erratic, with alienation. She had many identities. Most of the time, she was the super master of Samsara Palace. Sometimes, she was the master of Samsara Palace. If she wanted, she could also be the wife of the commander of Dark Knights. But in her heart, she was Flaming Fire who followed the boss. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Flaming Fire's beautiful eyes and remained silent. Flaming Fire no longer concealed her true strength. That night, many things of Samsara Palace had emerged in front of him. Li Tianlan didn't have the excitement and sense of accomplishment of solving some puzzles. When the other party revealed more and more of her secrets, the only thing he felt was a kind of panic that he couldn't explain. That was the feeling of loss. It seemed that something was passing by him unconsciously, like quiet time, like the cold wind, like the snow and moon. He couldn't see it. He couldn't touch it, but it was passing by every moment. Before Li Tianlan could speak, the voice of the master of Samsara Palace had sounded. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet and a little cold. Li Tianlan glanced at her, and he looked a little hesitant. When the war broke out, he woke up from the hypnosis state, which even included his meeting with the master of Samsara Palace. Now he couldn't even be sure whether his memory of the night he met with the master of Samsara Palace was true or not. Li Tianlan shook his head. "I want to see it." "If you have seen it, then let's go," the master of Samsara Palace said coldly. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly and didn't speak. Around them, countless troops of Snow Country rushed over. Inside the sword energy, the atmosphere was a little cold. Lin Fengting coughed, gave Lin Yuxian a wink, and walked in another direction. Lin Yuxian touched his nose and followed his father. Li Wangsheng and Yi led the terracotta army. Dongxing Rushi also wanted to go, but she didn't know where to go. She took 2 steps casually. Li Tianlan waved his hand. "You stay here," Dongxing Rushi said, obediently. She looked at the master of Samsara Palace and then at Li Tianlan, feeling a little confused. More and more troops of Snow Country retreated. Li Tianlan glanced at the crowd outside the sword energy and took the initiative to ask, "What's going on?" "Snow Country is retreating." The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was simple. "The battlefield is so big, and everyone has so many chips. Some people enter, and some people leave. Jia Delan lost everything, and other people of Snow Country don't dare to gamble, so this is the only result." "Lost everything?" Li Tianlan was a little confused. The small group of elites he led was a veritable lone army. After cutting off contact with the intelligence system of Samsara Palace, they hadn't received news from the outside world for a long time. The master of Samsara Palace said, "Jia Delan is dead." It was earth-shattering. Dongxing Rushi opened her mouth wide. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically. Jia Delan was the president of Snow Country. It was self-evident what his death meant to the whole situation of Snow Country and Eastern Europe. The news was so shocking that Li Tianlan couldn't figure out the series of possible consequences caused by it for a while. But in this way, there seemed to be a reasonable explanation for the retreat of Snow Country. In addition, Marshal Dongxing Wudi led the Black Dragon Army to sweep the south of Snow Country. Now they are only 200 miles away from Kamas, the capital of Snow Country. Marshal Dongxing once said that he would take down Kamas within 24 hours and had tea with Jia Delan in the palace of Snow Country. So when Jia Delan felt the pressure, he mobilized the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps of Snow Country to march to Reki City. As a result, there was an internal conflict between the 2 corps on the way. Jia Delan was assassinated in the chaos. Faced with this situation, other high-level officials of Snow Country made the decision to give up Mormons and transfer the nearby troops back to defend against Marshal Dongxing. The master of Samsara Palace paused and whispered, "Snow Country is finished." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He didn't expect that Jia Delan would be assassinated. And he didn't expect that Dongxing Wudi would send troops to Snow Country. There were too many details hidden in the concluding words of the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan thought quietly, and his heart was complicated. How could there be no risk in a war? even the victorious generals would be defeated and killed. Snow Country was a superpower with a particularly strong military force. If Dongqing Wudi sent troops to Snow Country and won, it would be a great achievement. But if he failed, he would be doomed eternally. As a result, he did so. It had been less than 24 hours since the war in Eastern Europe broke out. Dongqing Wudi, who was in Yuzhou, had fought to a place less than 200 kilometers away from Kammas. What did this mean? It meant that Dongqing Wudi didn't hesitate at all when he got the news. He set off in the shortest time, gave the order in the shortest time, assembled the army in the shortest time, and launched the war in the shortest time. At that time, Li Huacheng, who was in Reki City, was not in danger. And his actions were too late to stop any meeting. Li Tianlan naturally knew the risks he had to bear. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Mormons. What was the man who was taking root in Snow Country and approaching Kammas, the capital of Snow Country, thinking at this moment? A warm little hand held Li Tianlan's palm. Dongqing Rushi blinked at him and whispered, "Dad is here." "Yes." Li Tianlan whispered, "He's here." The master of Samsara Palace quickly glanced at the hands of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi, and said calmly, "This is not a battlefield you can participate in now. I told you that the final battle has nothing to do with you. Go back." "No." Li Tianlan said without hesitation. "I said that even if it's meaningless for me to come here, I have to see it." He paused for a moment before he continued. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled slightly. "See me?" Li Tianlan didn't speak. "No matter who I see." The master of Samsara Palace laughed self-mockingly. "After the war, Little Bai will come back to you. You want to see Mr. Lin, and now you see him. You want to see me, and now you see me. You want to see Flaming Fire, and Flaming Fire is also here. As for Tribulation, he's not in Mormons now. He left after killing Arsis and 3,000 of the most elite saint warriors of the Vatican. His whereabouts are unknown. Except for these, there should be no one worth seeing in Mormons now. I still have to see." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. "I said, go back." The master of Samsara Palace's voice suddenly rose and became sharp. Li Tianlan looked into her eyes without fear. "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace's chest rose and fell gently. "I brought people here and sacrificed hundreds of lives. I'm not sure if it's meaningful, but now I'm going back without entering Mormons." Li Tianlan laughed self-mockingly. "Then it's really meaningless. Even if you go to Mormons, you can't do anything." The master of Samsara Palace's voice was cold and almost mean. "Then I want to go, too," Li Tianlan said quietly. He didn't emphasize anything, but he had to go to Mormons. This idea was so strong that he couldn't tell why, but he just wanted to go, regardless of everything. The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were in a trance. It was still dark in front of her. But the boundless deep everlasting night seemed to be covered with flying snow. The vast whiteness shrouded them, dispelling time. That night many years ago, she seemed to be standing in the snow, stopping that man. "Don't go, please. I brought people here. What's the point of going back now? Even if you go, you can't do anything." "Then I want to go, too." Time flew. Countless pictures began to overlap. The master of Samsara Palace laughed. Her eyes were extremely sad. She didn't know if she was wrong today. But she was wrong back then. In the snow that year, he went to the place he wanted to go. After all, it was meaningful. The meaning of everything was the end. He arrived there. Then he died in her arms. "Go back," the master of Samsara Palace murmured. Her tone was so soft that it was almost pleading. Li Tianlan's heart seemed to be twitching violently. The severe pain made his body shake slightly. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace's eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "I won't go back, and I have a request." "What?" The master of Samsara Palace was in a daze. Let me, he stared deeply into the master of Samsara Palace's eyes. Look at your face. The master of Samsara Palace's body stiffened for a moment. Flaming Fire's body also stiffened for a moment. Time was short. Every minute and every second. After a long time, the master of Samsara Palace nodded gently. Okay. Li Tianlan's hand trembled. The master of Samsara Palace reached out and took off her cloak. She put her palm on the mask in front of her and slowly took it off. The true face of the master of Samsara Palace appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Time seemed to be passing mercilessly. The face in front of him was a little swollen, and the skin was loose. But the facial features were delicate, and he could vaguely see the appearance of the past. The master of Samsara Palace looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. Am I disappointing you? Li Tianlan shook his head. He was really not disappointed, but somehow, his heart was empty. The master of Samsara Palace put on the mask again. Li Tianlan took a step back and almost fell into Dongqing Rushi's arms. In the faint sound of the wind, he murmured in a low voice. Only Dongqing Rushi could hear it. It's all fake. His weak body struggled twice and barely recovered his strength. The mighty army of Snow Country was still retreating. The boundless crowd spread over from afar, and there was no end in sight. Vaguely, the fight in Mormons ahead was still going on. Li Tianlan straightened up and said with difficulty, "Enter the city." "I told you, you can't go. This place has nothing to do with you," the master of Samsara Palace frowned. "I told you, enter the city." Li Tianlan suddenly became extremely furious. His eyes were red, and he stared at the master of Samsara Palace. His face was even a little ferocious. "Enter the city." The master of Samsara Palace's body shook slightly and she lowered her head. Flaming Fire stood beside her, motionless. Li Tianlan ignored her and strode in the direction of Mormons. A faint sigh rang out behind him. The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was quiet and cold. Then enter the city. In the war and smoke thousands of miles away, the reunion of the father and son was not reprimanded as others had imagined. The sword energy filled the eyes of the father and son. The figures of Lin Fengting and Lin Yuxian disappeared from everyone's sight. Lin Fengting looked at the retreating army of Snow Country in front of him and was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. "I didn't let you come, but you still came. How do you feel along the way?" Lin Yuxian was stunned. He opened his mouth, but did not make a sound. He stood where he was, deep in thought. How did he feel? He had too many feelings along the way. He thought he could describe all his emotions, but when the words came to his mouth, he did not know how to say them. The scenes replayed in his mind. Li Tianlan ordered to set off in the conference room of Reki City. In the pervading flames of war, his figure stood on the roof of the car. Under the illumination of the sword light, the team of hundreds of people broke through the defense line of the army. The roaring marshal fell to the ground with his eyes open. Countless feelings and words were brewing in his heart, but he really did not know what to say for a while. "If you can't say it, it seems that you really have feelings." Lin Fengting laughed. "Do you remember the question I asked you before the chaos in Eastern Europe?" "Yes." Lin Yuxian hesitated and nodded. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out, he met Li Tianlan as Qin Weibai's younger brother and awkwardly called Li Tianlan, who was younger than him, brother-in-law. At that time, Lin Fengting once told him to think about his future path. "Have you thought about it?" Lin Fengting looked at his son with soft eyes. Lin Yuxian hesitated and whispered, "Dad, I want to stay in Zhongzhou State and Tiannan." Lin Fengting sighed softly. The reason why he did not let Lin Yuxian participate in the current chaos was that he did not want to let him face life and death that no one could control, and he did not want to hear Lin Yuxian's current decision. The extremely wild war was enough to burn everyone's will. The Lin clan was hiding from the world. However, the wild and passionate battle could burn Lin Yuxian's mind. The war was like a raging fire, burning everything. It could be foreseen that Lin Yuxian would experience a lot in the future. How could a person who had experienced these be willing to hide from the world? Lin Yuxian had a lot of feelings tonight. He might not be able to say these feelings clearly now, but they were enough to prompt him to make a final decision. I'm really tired, Lin Fengting shook his head. Dad. Lin Yuxian wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Lin Fengting glanced at him and chuckled. If you decide to stay, then I will do it according to my original idea. I will hand over the Lin clan to Qin Weibai for the next 20 years. After 20 years, I will hand over the Lin clan to your sister. As for you, if you want to stay, then stay. The Lin clan has not had a branch in Zhongzhou state for many years. But our original roots are still here. At this moment, he thought of the luck that the master of Samsara Palace had mentioned, the white mist in the manor, and Li Tianlan who carried the dragon vein on his back. Lin Fengting thought quietly and said calmly, you can stay in Zhongzhou state, but I hope you can know why you are staying in Zhongzhou state. What makes you make up your mind and your future goals are two different things. For the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian hesitated. For Zhongzhou state. Lin Fengting laughed. For the Lin clan. He was not surprised by this sentence. For Zhongzhou state. Only this sentence could make him feel a little relieved. This at least meant that his son had matured a lot overnight. Not far away, Li Tianlan roared at the master of Samsara Palace. He shook off the master of Samsara Palace and strode forward. Lin Fengting looked at this scene quietly. There was some pity in his eyes. Finally. I still have to enter the city. The battle in the city was getting more and more fierce. Snow Country had issued an order to abandon Mormons. The army was retreating. However, it was extremely troublesome for hundreds of thousands of troops to retreat. After all, only the army that had not officially joined the battle could go back as soon as possible. The legions and Mormons were still fighting in a daze. The commanders of several legions had already died. The high-level officers were incomplete, and the middle-level officers suffered heavy casualties. In a short time, effective orders could not be transmitted at all. The soldiers in the city could only fight and keep fighting in the face of the enemy. The phalanx formed by the Purgatory of Heaven capital had shrunk by more than half. Countless elites had stayed in this broken city forever. They fought with Snow Country, the Beihai Corps, the Samsara Palace, and the Polar Ground Alliance. Deity always stood at the forefront, but countless attacks appeared from all directions. The Purgatory of Heaven capital kept losing members. Only the sword intent in the front was always strong. Since the beginning of the war, this had always been the most powerful sword light on the battlefield. It surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Even Tyrant in his heyday did not dare to charge head-on in the face of this sword light. Deity's face had turned pale. The vast sword energy began to become messy. After fighting for nearly a day and a night, his body, which had been stretched taut all this time, finally began to gradually collapse. His condition was deteriorating, and the range of the majestic sword chi was also shrinking. However, the enemies in front of him were still everywhere, and there was no end to them. In the distance, the crowd of Snow Country was shouting something, and their voices were getting louder and louder. Gradually, the army of Snow Country began to retreat. However, the Samsara Palace and the North Sea Corps, who had long been in a killing frenzy, were desperately killing all the enemies. As Snow Country retreated, the whole situation became more and more chaotic. Deity looked at the situation in front of him. After a long silence, he said softly, "Daybreak." "Your Highness." Daybreak, who was covered in blood and extremely weak, walked over. "We lost." Deity whispered. Daybreak was silent. After a long time, he said in a complicated tone, "Yes, I lost. I don't like this kind of battlefield, because in this kind of battlefield, even if you want to admit defeat, you can't." God said softly, "But there is still a chance after all." Snow Country is leaving and we admit defeat. This is our only chance. Daybreak looked up at Deity. Deity's face was full of exhaustion. So, admit defeat. Take advantage of the chaos, let's retreat. Before he could finish his words, he suddenly stopped. At that moment, his pale face became paler. As if he had seen something incredible, he raised his head and looked at the sky in the distance. The next second, almost everyone seemed to feel something and looked up at the same time. Outside the city, the master of Samsara Palace, who was about to enter the city, raised her head, and her eyes gradually became hot. Li Tianlan's eyes were bright. Lin Fengting's expression was complicated. Tyrant kept rubbing his wristband in the city. Cheers gradually appeared in the Wang family of Beihai. An incomparably quiet atmosphere suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Everyone was looking at the sky in the distance. The sky in the distance was moving. To be exact, it was tearing. The vast world seemed to have completely disappeared in an instant. The unimaginably majestic sword energy surged from afar like a tsunami. The sword energy tore the sky into the shape of a sword. The sword light was flying. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Countless sword lights were burning in the night. The whole distant sky was lit up. Countless sword lights were flying in the air, almost occupying the whole world. There were more and more sword lights. They were dense and spread all the way from the sky to the earth, like a storm that could swallow heaven and earth. The storm was getting clearer and clearer. Swords appeared clearly in everyone's sight one after another. Countless sword shadows danced and shuttled back and forth between heaven and earth, spanning thousands of meters. In the magnificent sword curtain that covered heaven and earth, there seemed to be someone walking in the sky, 1,000 meters in one step. Wherever he passed, countless retreating Snow Country troops were completely torn apart and destroyed. So the sword curtain turned into a blood-red color. The blood-red light filled the sky. Daybreak was dumbfounded. Deity's body trembled slightly. Everyone was staring at the figure in the sword curtain. The chosen one, Deity's voice sounded, with great pressure and difficulty. Plains, mountains, seas, heaven and earth. They were all under his feet. On the night of August 24th. When Snow Country admitted defeat and left completely. From Reki City to Mormons. After crossing thousands of miles, the only chosen one in several eras officially entered the arena. In the scarlet sword curtain that spread over the whole world, he, known as the Sword Emperor, stood at the highest point, overlooking countless years and countless eras. Supremacy, you're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.